for most, I don't think they have metrics that they're tracking at all.
No.
Outside
they're
of
looking in the
body
mirror.
weight.
They're looking in the mirror. Body weight and the mirror is probably it.
Yeah, and the mirror may not be bad if they're taking a picture.
Yes, to compare it to.
To compare it to the
won't really indicate where you're storing your fat. It just gives you an overall. You get into DEXA now. Now we can literally see not just around the biceps. We can see here. We can see here. This part of the bicep, higher part of the bicep. We can see everything. So the DEXA is obviously ideal. But if you can, like you said, I would say hydrostatic weighing or skin fold.
Well, there's... It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest is JYM Stoppani, owner of JYMStoppani.com and JYM Supplement Sciences. There's a lot of other accolades to your name, but I'm going to ask a question first, right?
Yep.
So just to say this is a leading question. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to when you were training with your father in a basement, right? So 12 years old, I believe, something around that age.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
11,
so
I started around,
Marine, your father was a Marine, some military background. You're finally allowed to go down and train with him. Probably have like AC/DC's Back in Black just came out. So that's either a cassette, right?
Right.
Or an 8-track. I don't know, how updated the audio.
I had a car with an 8-track when I was 16, actually.
Yeah.
I had an 8-track player in it, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. So right around this time is when Back in Black came out. So we're kind of dating ourselves here a little bit. Okay. So since that time, you've got a PhD in exercise physiology and a minor in biochem. You are a past Yale research assistant, a decade as a senior science editor at Muscle and Fitness, Hers, Flex, and all the other associated magazines that were there. 2 decades in the industry professionally, in the fitness industry, 4 decades of your own training experience. So now here's the question. You have 10 or 12-year-old. And how old was your dad at that time?
Oh, God. He's 27 years older than me. So what would that be? He was in his 30s.
Okay. So in his 30s, right? So you have intermediate to high intermediate, with strength and conditioning and training, then a beginner. Looking back after everything that you've accomplished over the years and the education that you've acquired and the training experience you have, what were the things that you guys were doing correctly?
Well, we were lifting consistently.
I mean, because we're going back to, I forgot to mention this as well, buckets, for loading objects in cans.
Yeah, that was exactly my father was a very creative man, as far as building and engineering. In fact, he was an engineer for the phone company. Started climbing poles, and this is back when a company would invest in their employees. They put him through engineering school, so he was an engineer, and he could craft anything. I mean, he made a leg press using a stop sign post and cables and buckets. It was crazy. We had a cable crossover, a pull down.
So you had a pretty decent setup,
but it was all like I said, it was just cables. He would run the pulleys in the ceiling. We'd have big cans, buckets with cement, and he would put poles through the buckets so we could add extra weights. And
okay.
And so, we were able to use progressive overload, consistency.
So was the progressive overload part of the plan?
Yeah. That's why, we could add the weight to the, to the pull down, because, you fill a 50 gallon bucket, whatever, with cement, it's only going to be so heavy. So how do you adjust?
Yeah. Was it periodized though? Or was it just, we're going to go heavy on this day?
There was little periodization.
Okay.
And
right.
Did I know? And in fact, even going further from that, even into my bodybuilding days, there was very little periodization as far as bodybuilding goes. 8 to 10 was the magic, maybe 12 reps was the magic.
Yeah, that was when you were trying to increase the weight.
Range, you know what I mean? It really wasn't until I got into the science of training that periodization was even a concept, at least to me and to other bodybuilders, really.
Yeah. So the consistency was there.
The consistency, we had some progressive overload. I like to think some of the form was, okay. My father wasn't, he didn't have a, background in training other than what he, taught himself, what he learned in the Marines. And his father was a professional boxer. So I was lucky to sort of be surrounded by strength athletes of many, even on my mother's side. She had a cousin who was on the U.S. Olympic weightlifting team. So that sort of lifestyle, the, strength training, and I had a cousin on my father's side who was a competitive bodybuilder. I was surrounded by it. So not just from my father. And so one of the things I like to talk about is the fact that I was lucky to have that influence and that they supported it, because I know a lot of people who started weightlifting as a teenager and their parents thought they were crazy.
Yeah.
They couldn't understand it. And that is such a bizarre concept to me, because being a strong man was something that I was taught from my father, from my mother even. That was just sort of in our family. So again, what things that we're doing right? I guess the consistency, the progressive overload, maybe some form, but definitely no periodization.
Okay. So then what would be the things going back? Like if, not really going back, but if you found two people today in that same situation, same ages, training at home, what would you have them do that you did not?
That's hard to say.
Well, the interesting aspect here is, one's 12 and one's 30.
Right.
So that you can logically think there's two different types of programs that should be going on.
Of course. Right. So, yeah. So, I would probably not do so much volume going early on, as a beginner.
How was it set up? Was it total body?
No, it was more bodybuilding style, muscle group.
It's like Arnold,
programs,
Arnold,
Joe Weider.
Yeah. So higher 15, 20 sets for big body parts.
Yeah, I don't think I was doing maybe quite that much. He wouldn't have me doing that much, but it was more, body part focus. So I'd probably say less volume as a beginner. I think a lot of beginners could use that advice, is less volume, because one of the things that you do want to change, at least for a bodybuilder and for hypertrophy, is the amount of volume that you need. With more experience, you need more volume to stimulate those. So starting with lower volume as a beginner is important, because you don't want to overshoot it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that, not just progressive overload, but volume gradually increasing over a lifter's timeline is at least for hypertrophy.
It's another variable to periodize.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So that would be one of the things. What would be others? I mean, did you stick to compound movements?
A lot of compound movements, but again, we had the cables, so we could do the crossovers, but it was mainly, a lot of compound movements: bench press, squat, deads, bent over rows. Yeah, so a lot of compound movements.
What about nutrition?
Nutrition, I didn't learn from my father. My father, he loves to eat.
Yeah.
And we have decent genetics. So he's 80 now, still in, great shape. You would never know he's an 80. He's 80-year-old. He loves to eat, but you would never know it. You know what I mean? We have good genetics, and he exercises a lot. But even as an early age, I was cooking my own meals a lot as a 12 and 13-year-old, because I was reading in the muscle and fitness magazines, how to get enough protein, how to get, carbs and fat. And, what my mom was making for dinner didn't always wasn't always the perfect meal as far as I was concerned. So I was cooking at a very young age so that I can get my macros straight.
So if I'm thinking back to that time period, the low fats was the thing, right?
It really was. I was doing Pritikin. Do you remember Pritikin?
Oh yeah. You're like over 30 grams of fat a day. You're like losing your mind, right?
Exactly. Yes. Which is horrible for a teenager. You know what I'm saying? Because you want, you need the fat for testosterone production. We know that, you know?
So there's something that would change.
For sure.
Yeah.
The nutrition would definitely change. And we had a neighbor who sold, do you remember Shackley?
Yeah.
Do you remember that? And it was mainly soy protein.
Yeah.
It was all like soy.
Yeah.
So I was drinking tons of
the shit would float.
It was
float on the top.
So nasty.
Yeah, the protein
I was putting it down. And then I would get the Joe Weider weight gainer tablets.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember those.
No, I remember those.
I'd be eating at a breakfast, eggs and whatever, toast, bacon. And then I've got this pile of Joe Weider weight gainer tablets that tasted literally like chalk. And I would just be chewing those, putting those down. So yeah, the nutrition would definitely change.
Yeah, the protein powders have definitely advanced. I remember putting this crap in orange juice.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know why. Just anything, but it still had to plug my nose.
Yes. Anything to make it palatable.
Yeah, to pound it down and never mix. Incredible. So was that time coming up, is that what sparked your interest to go into this industry or to go to college for that?
Definitely. As a high school student, I grew up in Torrington, Connecticut, which is a blue collar town, very similar to, where we are right now, very blue collar, so I didn't really have the proper, advice, it wasn't like we had a decent college, advisor in Torrington, Connecticut. And so I ended up going to school for athletic training, like sports medicine, getting an undergrad. That was my focus because I didn't know there was anything called exercise science. It really wasn't a field. This is, I graduated high school in 1986.
Yeah, that's when I graduated.
86 as well.
So I ran into the same thing with college as well, is you had like sport management.
Yeah,
so
right.
I don't want to manage a health club, so the options were kind of.
Or get a PE degree, physical education.
Yeah.
Or, like I said, there was sports medicine. And so, I was very interested in the science and in medicine as well. So I was toying with, maybe being an orthopedist, something like that, because I had no idea that you could actually study testosterone levels and people out, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I didn't, you know what I mean? And in 1986, that really wasn't happening yet. Anything in exercise science was all aerobic training. It was all aerobic training. You go to American College of Sports Medicine, it was all aerobics. That's all, you know what I mean? And even if you look at the exercise recommendations that the American College of Sports Medicine puts out, back in 86, it was just aerobic exercise 3 times a week. There was no recommendation for resistance training at all. And it wasn't until Bill Kramer, I don't know if you know that name, but William Kramer, who really started the science of resistance training and looking at what happens when people lift weights. And we're kind of jumping all over the place, but I was lucky enough to have Bill Kramer as my undergrad advisor when I got to University of Connecticut. Even though I was in athletic training, he quite wasn't Bill Kramer yet. He had just finished his postdoc, he was a brand new professor, but he's telling me about, always looking at growth hormone levels. And I'm just like, oh, you're doing what?
Yeah.
Which completely, changed my view of what was out there. And that's when I switched over to exercise physiology.
And while you were there, what were you aspiring to do post-graduation from a career path?
When I first started at the University of Connecticut as an undergrad, I was thinking of going probably to med school, maybe if not physical therapy, then something, you know what I mean? Like working with athletes in that, not being an athletic trainer. but getting that information that was important to me is learning that. And part of me, believe it or not, I grew up reading the muscle fitness magazines and learning about muscle fiber types. Joe Weider had scientists writing in the mag. They were terrible articles for most lay people to read, but for a teenage kid who was interested in science and medicine and in weightlifting, it was amazing. I was learning about muscle fiber type, and that's really what sort of inspired me to take the science of exercise and run further. But I remember being a teenager and thinking, geez, maybe one day I'll be writing for Muscle Fitness and Flex magazine. And so when I went to school, I did athletic training, sports medicine as an undergrad. When I went to Auburn for my master's, I was doing biomechanics. And we were lucky enough to have Bill Kazmaier come into the lab. He was in Auburn. I remember Bill Kazmaier, right? We would actually be looking at him in the lab for the biomechanics. And so I was able to have a lot of experience in different areas. I then left Auburn, after getting that master's, I went to Georgia Southern, where I focus on sports nutrition. My master's thesis is on medium chain triglycerides. This is back in 1991, before most people even knew what coconut oil.
So that before or after Perillo's?
That was right around Perillo.
Right around that time.
Yes, John.
Okay. Yeah, the MCT.
Yes, he was a huge
Captri.
Yes, huge proponent. His two things were the MCT oil and the
fiber,
myofascial stretching.
Yeah, yes, and then fiber was used. I followed that for like about a year.
And the stretching was this huge, which is interesting because now we can see how important stretch is in hypertrophy, which is really interesting.
It's really interesting.
He was talking about that decades. In fact, if you watch most bodybuilders in the early 80s, they stretched between exercises.
Yeah.
They would do, they're training back, they'd be doing back stretches in between their sets, which really interesting because now what the science is showing is the stretching the muscle may be the most critical component of hypertrophy.
Brutal. I went, and while I was in college, I went and trained at his place once with a roommate friend of mine that was a bodybuilder. And the stretching was brutal. The stretching was more brutal than the actual training.
Yes.
It hurt like a bitch, but it's just part of the, it was just kind of part of the deal. So I remember that vividly. I remember his belt squat machine apparatus, which was different than the belt squats now.
Right.
You held onto a pole.
Yes.
And that was like 1,000,000 reps post failure, so that was a nightmare. And then, following the diet, which this was an interesting one because I don't know if it was 6,000 or 8,000 calories, doesn't really matter, but I was taking a nutritional biochem class at the time. And one of the projects that we did was to take that diet and just break it down.
Yeah.
And then what we realized is, the MCT, may or may not be absorbing at the rate that was stated at the calorie rate going in. Then the fiber was definitely going straight through.
Right.
So out of like the 8,000 calories, it was really like 5,000. Because all the other ones are just kind of like going straight through.
It's passing through,
which was still fascinating to me, right? Because that aside, there's still satiation and feeling like you're full, all the time. So it was interesting. So that was where your master's was at, right?
Yeah, Georgia State, right.
Yeah. So then
I got a master's with a minor in nutrition from the nutrition department. And then I went back I worked for a while in cardiac rehab. And then I went back to get a PhD at University of Connecticut.
And what was the motivation for that?
It was always kind of the plan. But I had a son in 95 so sort of derailed my plan, but I started in 96.
Okay.
Even with a 1-year-old, back as a doctoral student.
So
that was the plan,
It looks like you're tracked, to basically stay in academia your whole life.
Really? That was really the plan. Was to to be a scientist, a professor, and to be in academia.
So then when this crossroads happens and you start writing for Muscle and Fitness or whatever magazines would take the articles back at that time, how did that go over with your colleagues?
Interesting.
That's an interesting, because
so
it's a different, journals are going to target one demographic and that's it. And if a different demographic tries to go read, they're not going to understand what they're even reading.
Right. Precisely.
Right? So it's a limited demographic where the magazine articles are getting in front of the people that actually need the knowledge.
Yes.
Which is funny how, I can see them like, what are you doing? Like, why are you writing for that?
Yeah. So this all happened. I was at Yale School of Medicine doing my postdoc fellowship, right? I had just won an award from the American Physiological Society as a young investigator for my, research on looking at these metabolic genes, how they turn on and off during exercise. But I'm, seeing studies on creatine come, on PubMed, and I'm like, I don't have time to even read this. I've got to get funding. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've got to work on my grants. I've got to, as a scientist, you typically stay in a very small range. You know what I mean? If you're looking at metabolic genes, that's what you've got to, you can't be worried about what creatine studies coming out. And so I'm missing all this stuff that I'm really, really interested in. And so what I did is I literally kind of cold called Muscle and Fitness. I took what I was doing in the lab and converted into, applicable advice. This might mean that then you could do this in the gym or eat this, and send it to Muscle and Fitness. And they loved it. Absolutely loved it. Had me start writing for them. And then they asked if I would consider coming on as their science editor. They were looking for a science editor and they thought I would be a perfect fit.
So what exactly was that role? I mean, are you reviewing all the science articles that are coming through?
So that role sort of evolved when I got there. When I first got there, that role was to just take all their other experts, their personal trainers that write, and sort of say, hey, we need an article on 5x5s.
Yeah,
we need an article on building bigger biceps. And then they would write it, and then I would as a scientist and somebody who trained, I sort of had a different view than I think some of these other experts. And so, one of the jobs that I had was to make sure that the advice that we're giving is consistent. We can't be telling people, hey, follow this no carb diet 1 month, like Men's Health, right? And then the very next month they tell you low carb will kill you. You know what I mean? And so you're giving this conflicting advice. And so I really viewed the magazines as a manual, and that advice needed to be consistent. If the science changed, then we changed it, but it needed to be, we couldn't have one expert saying conjugate method is the best, and then the very next month going conjugates. Somebody writes, no, that if we said that this method is the best, unless there's something other than just somebody's opinion, we're maintaining that. And so it was important for me to maintain the consistency of the information. And it sort of was all over the place with some of these writers. And so I sort of brought on the concept of me being the writer, not just the editor of these articles. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, it'd be easier for me to just write the article on how to grow bigger biceps, because by the time I rewrite what Joe so-and-so wrote, that's consistent with the Weider principles and what we've said, for the last 40 years, it just needs too much work. And so I eventually became the writer. And that really wasn't the way it worked before. The editor was the editor. You had a stable of writers. You just edited their work. And so I started writing the articles on diets and training programs. And that's sort of what built the foundation of my followers.
So if you've published, I can't even, tens of thousands of articles.
God,
right?
I couldn't even count. Right.
A boatload of books. You run into a problem to where you basically need to recycle what you're putting out, because you can't say anything new after a certain point in time, so with muscle and fitness at that time, because now you're putting the consistency in there as well, which is actually funneling down, more stuff that you could be able to put out.
Right.
And granted, you're getting new readers all the time, right. So there's that aspect. So it doesn't always have to be new stuff, because I think a lot of writers, and you may know better than I do, that will write for this space, tend to think that everybody has read their first article.
Yes.
And then knows exactly where they are now.
Precisely.
And they don't want to go back and maybe reframe the same things that they've written. But reframing the same things that you've written is also wanting to stick a knife in your head.
Yeah. I mean, there's always going to be somebody who needs to learn how to do a curl.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It doesn't matter how many times we've written that in the magazine. Every month, there's going to be a person that comes along and needs to learn how to do a curl. We can't just assume that everybody who picks it up knows how to do. So, yeah. So, we do sort of repeat ourselves, right? We have to, because you got to focus on that new reader. But the nice thing for me is that as a scientist, the new stuff was what was coming out in the labs, and how can you now
implement?
Yeah. What does this mean? You know what I mean? What does that, and the nice thing about today is that there's more science that's specific to performance and hypertrophy and strength. Before, there really wasn't that much. So we would have to look at, studies on muscle, dystrophy to sort of make our conclusions about what this means for a training program.
And as you said, it was also very aerobic bias.
Very, very aerobic bias.
Yeah. So it's, I would assume getting the funding for any of the thing outside of that would have been rough too.
Yes, very rough. That's the other thing that people don't really understand about science is who's going to pay for the study. The study isn't free.
Big muscle.
That's the best thing I've ever heard.
Right. They're loaded, right?
Yeah. Like that, it just doesn't happen that way. You know what I mean? But now, now with, social media and people seeing, fitness influencers, there are more people that are having these questions about like, hey, is it more important to stretch the muscle or can you have the peak contraction, So we're getting better studies, I think, because we have more people who are now interested in the science of getting bigger and getting stronger.
Yeah. We'll stay on the topic of content, which is a couple segments down from the first one I had, but we're already on here anyhow. So you come through the magazine world for I'm looking for a word for print world, I guess, right? The print world. Yep. And then that's in 2000s or so, everything starts.
That's no longer a word, print. Nobody knows.
Exactly. Things start moving, online, right? Yes. And that was a giant transition. It's kind of like the transition that we're looking at now with GPTs. I think people underestimate how big of a transition that was, because I used to buy all the magazines and there's a ton of them out there, but several times I've taken all of them to the library just because there's so many. And I now kind of wish I never would have done that and would have kept them all.
Yes.
And books as well. But I figured if they're a library and if I really need them, I could just go get them, check them as just another storage place. But when I started the company, it was in 2000. So we're putting out articles and they're free articles per se. And I think T Nation was up and I don't know where bodybuilding.com was closed, either up or just starting around that same time as well. So there's several sources online that are basically just, here's the content. There's no cost. Now print media, they were slow, to get online. So what were some of those conversations like? Where somebody has to be saying, hey, look, we need to take this online, or somebody else is saying, no, we can't monetize that.
Cannibalize the magazines.
Yeah.
That's literally so interesting. My business partner now, Mike McElwain, he he was very, very digitally advanced at the time, and he was in ad sales at the time. He's a certified strength conditioning specialist, but was selling ads for the magazines. And, he knew my work, so he would come up and ask questions about, bands, resistance, band resistance, and things like that. And he's the one who said, what do you think of, the digital world? Like that's where it's kind of going. Yeah, he's like, I'm building this workout website. It's all bands. People can do it at home. I'm like, oh, that's really an interesting concept. And he's like, we need something for the magazines like that. They need to, their website right now, you go there, you can find articles. That's it. There's no videos. There's no what's the point of going online to read what you can read in the magazine?
Yeah.
And he's like, do you have any interest in doing some videos for Muscle and Fitness? And I'm like, sure. And we called it Muscle and Fitness Raw. I had it set up in my garage. I had a power rack in my garage. So I started, the first video, I had the Sony camera balanced on my bike seat to film a video on doing the reverse grip bench press. That was the very first video I put out. And Mike, who literally was in ad sales, convinced the person who was running musclefitness.com to let him put up this new video series that our science editor, Jim Stoppani, was doing. And they put it up, and hundreds of thousands of views. The upper management was pissed about it, because why are we giving this free advice? I don't want you guys spending your time making free content. This is going to cannibalize the magazines. And, they allowed us to continue doing that, but they were not at all supportive.
Now we're
in fact, a meeting that Mike brought up, the concept of having me do videos, the entire creative team, the editorial team was like, who would watch that? They were like, who would want to watch that?
Now at that time, were they hosting the videos, or were they on YouTube?
They were hosting the videos.
So there's a big cost with that back then too, because you're bringing back members. Right?
You remember
to where
when you're hosting.
It
you
costs.
have to pay for that.
Yes. So now, I mean,
so
if you're
now
in
not
their
only
position,
are you putting out free, but it's costing you
a lot
to put this out. So they were very, very, very resistant to doing that. And then bodybuilding.com contacted me, and they wanted me to do some videos for them. And I didn't see an issue with that. I'm like, sure, as long as you put up my credentials in Muscle and Fitness, senior science editor, Flex Magazine, all that. And of course.
It's actually great, because now they don't have to pay for the hosting, and you can link back, you're getting a backlink.
Yes. But to Muscle and Fitness, the higher ups, it was not so great. And Mike could even show them that most of the traffic that was coming from the website when I was doing videos for was coming from bodybuilding.com. That's how they found muscleandfitness.com. They had no interest. They had no concept. They couldn't even conceive how that would have any value. And in fact, they gave me, David Pecker, do you know that name? Who bought the magazines from Joe Weider. Called me on the phone and gave me an ultimatum. Either I stopped working for bodybuilding.com, which I was doing for free. They weren't paying me. I just saw an advantage of using video to teach somebody how to do a bench press versus trying to write it. And you know what I mean? I always compare it to teach somebody how to tie their shoe. Now, teach them in a video or teach them in an article.
Yeah. Well, aside from that, it's faster. As a creator,
exactly. It's much faster. It's much better. You can see what they're doing. Right? You know what I mean? It just makes more sense. They gave me an ultimatum, and that's why I left Muscle and Fitness. I told them, bye-bye. I'm going to work with bodybuilding.com, even though I'm not getting paid. Even though you're paying me, I'm going to quit your job and continue doing stuff for bodybuilding, because this is the future.
Do you know what their if it's even ethical to speak about what their revenue stream was, because they had ads, people paying for ads in the magazine. And then there's also the subscription. I'm going to go on a limb and say that the ads probably brought in more than the subscriptions, but I don't know. Would you know that?
It's close.
All right. So if it's close.
In its heyday, the subscriptions, they were in the millions.
Okay.
Like 40 million maybe. Yeah. Like in the heyday, we're talking about.
Well, that also drives ad revenue too.
Timeline. Really, when we go back, we're talking like 10, 15, maybe 20 year heyday. And then it just.
Because the online side just offers more opportunity to be able to service the ads. The people that are paying for the ads in the magazine can also get a bigger ad on the site.
Right. Yeah, precisely.
Oh God, this is a rabbit hole, right? Well, the other thing with that is, as soon as you have the digital ads, you have metrics that they can track.
Yes.
Where if it's an ad and it's in a magazine, you really don't know. Where did those sales actually come from? Was it muscle and fitness, or was it muscular development? Whereas you don't know.
It's much harder to track.
It's easier to charge for that and to sell that. But now when you have something that's trackable, it changes things. So I can see pros and cons of all that, but they were definitely slow to evolve, and I guess I'm on the other side of that, to where I didn't have print media. I didn't want print media, because if I did like print catalogs and, staple them and send them out, which was a pain in the ass.
But you already saw the future. I mean, you understood.
Well, it kind of happened accidentally, because I logged on, I got my first computer probably 97, working as a personal trainer. My brother in IT just built one for me, dial up, that kind of crap.
Yes.
So, and the first thing I'm looking for are Alaskan Malamutes, because I had 2 of them, right? Thinking I'm going to make a sled dog in Ohio. But, and then obviously the next is powerlifting, and it led me to what's out there on Conjugate. I found a site called deepsquatter.com, and he was basically just retyping Louis' articles from PLUSA. And a lot of the stuff wasn't really what we were doing. So I emailed him and said, hey, look, you have this Q&A. I can answer these questions. I'm actually here. I train there. And so that started out as he would email me the questions, then I would answer them and email them back. My grammar's not good. It's better now, but it was not good then. So he'd have to edit it, then put it up in front page. So all HTML and all this other kind of shit. But it would only update once a month, which back then in our mindset, that's what a magazine was, whatever. Yeah. And so that led to me doing some seminars. Then in one of the seminars, one of the attendees asked me if I ever thought about having a website. And my answer was, well, I have one, which was back then just a banner ad site. Right. That was it. Like, here's the number, call.
Yeah, for more information. Yeah, if you want to contact me.
Well, I don't need one. I have
That's exactly what JYMSupplementation.com was before I met Mike.
Yeah.
Same thing.
And then he had a buddy that was looking for somebody to test a platform which was like a forum, but not a forum. It was just a Q&A. So you ask the question, you get the answer, dead stop. No threads, right. And at that time, forums were a love-hate relationship. Most people hate than actually love it. They were a mess.
Yeah, a mess.
And I knew from the jump, I never wanted to be on a forum, because I didn't want to have to deal with that crap, just question and answer. So that's how we launched, was just a Q&A, like an Ask Dave thing. And then through the questions, people started asking me about product. Then it was, hey, can we build a store? And then it kind of went into that. So it wasn't this intentional, I want to have this e-commerce thing. It was, I just want to answer these questions.
Yeah, it evolves. It just evolves. Yeah.
And then there was a period to where, after 4 years of making zero revenue or zero profit, I started making some profit, but not much. And a client of mine recommended I take a business course through the eMyth, which was like a 4-year program. And the first thing that they told me is, you can't be the only person answering the questions, right? And I'm like, ego, all this other, it says Ask Dave. Like, I can't have somebody else do this. Like, well, you can't build a business and be doing that the whole time. So I started.
There's only so many hours in the day.
Yeah. So I started adding people to that. But as we were doing that, we're also putting out an article a month or something like that. And Then when T Nation asked me to write, it was a godsend because it was like, okay, I don't have to edit this. I don't have to format it. I don't have to do all this other crap.
Right.
I just,
have to
a link
it.
is a link, right? It's just going to link to their site. And that is when we started to be able to publish more articles, so the articles, Q&As, and training logs or whatever it was. And then that's when I started to feel some of the pressure from other print publishers, right? Not legally at that point coming after me for anything,
right. Yep.
But you can feel it. They don't like this. They don't like this at all.
No.
So you're trying to, run ads and do things in certain places. And they're like, well, we can't do that. We have an exclusive with X, Y, and Z. I'm like, well, son of a bitch, so it was interesting to watch.
Yes.
Because it was easy to see where everything was going. Because it's like, this is not going to go away.
No.
And I think some people thought that it was going to go away.
I don't know why anybody would think that. Or they hoped it. I think they hoped. You know what I mean? But like you said, this isn't going away.
Yeah.
But
So
a lot of people just wished.
Well, what was interesting is the bane of all the content back then were the forums, right? It really was.
It really was.
It really was. But, the next wave that changed everything was social media, which is essentially just a more better forum.
True.
Right.
Yes.
Which is
good
weird, to think about that.
It really is.
And, with YouTube and Facebook and all that. So it's, again, that I think was an area where because the print was still holding on, that was like it. After that, if they didn't embrace that, they were pretty much done with it. But content over time has changed.
For sure.
And how people absorb it has changed. And you've been through all these different waves of change. And some I was an early adopter to, others not so much.
Right.
Like YouTube was one, not so much, right? Because I just saw it as a cheap way to host you just embed the video in your blog post and you don't have to pay for the hosting.
Right.
It's like bonus, right? But who gives a shit what's going on over there?
Yeah, right.
It's just,
massive,
saving hundreds and thousands of dollars because of that. What were some of the areas that you think you got in front of on time and other ones that you think you fell a little bit behind?
I don't know if there's anything that I've fallen behind on because I saw the magazines make that mistake of we're a magazine, we're print, we're not digital. And it's like, no, you're a media company.
Yeah.
That's what you need. You need to be a media company, not a print media company, because media is going to change.
Well, they forgot what business they're really in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I was fortunate to be there when, like you said, when it was going from print to websites, and I saw the mistakes. So that changed my mindset to what I do. Do you know what I mean? I'm not a magazine writer, editor. I'm a fitness media
creator, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so as soon as YouTube came out, I was using the platform. As soon as Facebook was there, I was on. As soon as Twitter came out, I was answering people's questions about how do you take creatine, how much creatine, right away. I was with bodybuilding.com when the magazines were telling me not to do that.
So then what was their stance with social media? Because they have forums and you're putting all the articles out there. Were they supportive of you putting out your own social media through YouTube and Facebook and such?
They were, as long as I stayed within their, guidelines.
No, I get
like
that.
They're like, for example, somebody asked me on a product once, and I answered and said, based on the ingredients, it's really not I wouldn't waste my time on the product. They saw my answer. That was one of our advertisers, and they
I get that.
wanted me to, delete that post, which I didn't agree with because it's my own platform. I built this, you know what I mean? I built these followers. It's, you know, it was my platform. I get to choose what I want to say on my platform. They didn't agree with that. But again, that's their, you know, that's their business. I understand why they wanted to do that.
Well, it's interesting because if we go back to print and you're the senior science editor, if we just use a gatekeeper philosophy, right? There's strong gatekeepers there, right?
Yes.
It's very hard to get published in one of the magazines because you got to get through that. Then when we go online, it's a little bit easier, but there's still the gatekeepers that are there.
Right.
You know, we had our policies with sponsors that we'd have or columnists that we'd have. They could write for other people, but there are some things, you know, don't endorse brands that are competitors and stuff like that. Yep. But still more rain, but still a gatekeeper. Then once you get Facebook, YouTube, and all that, there's really no gatekeeper except, you know, the deep state or whatever we want to say there, but that doesn't really influence anything we're going to be putting out.
No,
so
but
it's vast, right? So it's over the long term, that's a good thing, right? There's a lot of good because of that, because more voices can be heard, but there's also a lot of bad, which we'll get to later. But from this progression and story, it's good because now you're able to put out your own stuff, you know.
Yeah, you don't need to get...
And it's not that it was dishonest, right? Because you just wouldn't say, you know what I'm saying? Like, anabolics are a great example of that. It just wasn't talked about for a long time.
No.
Right? And it was...
Muscle Fitness would never do an article on are you kidding?
Yes.
Ever.
Yeah. So they weren't lying. Right. They just weren't saying, right? There's a difference.
Exactly.
A lie by omission, I suppose. But so from that side, it was good, but it's interesting to kind of look back to see how it's all progressed and the speed, you know, because each one of these jumps for over 100-year time period, you know, they get faster when the next iteration happens. And we're on the forefront of that now with just GPTs and whatever AI is going to be able to do. So it's there again, which we were talking earlier, where when people ask me about that, it's like, well, seen this before, not this, right?
Not this.
But the general overall philosophy and concept, yes, we've been through 3 iterations of that, right? And before magazines, it was just books, right?
Yeah.
So then magazines changed the books, and you can imagine the people that are publishing the books being like, what the hell is this?
Exactly. Right.
You know, this isn't vetted. This is,
exactly. Precisely. Yeah. Yes. This comes out every month. There's, you know, that takes longer to edit and do a, you know, book, and you can't put on once a month, but so we've seen a lot of change over the years. I love talking to you because few people have that perspective from literally print to, like you said.
Yeah, 8-track to streaming.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Or actually, I could go LP.
I mean, it's crazy to think about, you know, what we've witnessed in our lives, you know, really. Well,
it becomes part of the process, and I don't really like the word creator, but lack of a better word.
Yes.
If you're a creator in the industry, you know, not only when we're talking about vetted content, you know, can you last, right? Because it's somebody that, say, is 20 years old, you know, maybe in college studying kinesiology, maybe like year 1, year 2, and at best might have 5 years of serious training age, you know, and they're providing advice, which it's fine, but that's different than, you know, a PhD that's got 40 years of training experience. And what's really interesting to me now, and what I love about the podcast, is if we go back a decade and you're looking at the debates between bro science and science, right? It's like, oh, lab coat guys don't know shit, right? Where now there's a lot of lab coat guys that are jacked as fuck.
Yes.
Right. So they have both. Yes. And there's a lot of bro science guys that have studied and gone deep into the weeds and really know what they're talking about.
Very true.
So we've seen there's still the opposite, there's still the polar opposites, right? But there's so much more really good information that's coming between the synergy of those two groups, to where I'm sure there's still, you know, the far of each side of that, but in 10 more years they're going to be probably dead or dinosaurs, and they won't exist anymore,
No.
right? And then it's all going to fall. And I think that's why we've seen the advancements across the board and all these strength sports and bodybuilding just kind of go through the roof. And not just at the top level, because I think that's where everybody wants to look. Like, look at the top level. What's really advanced is the middle level.
Yes.
Substantially.
Yes.
You know, from what they look like, the knowledge that they have, and all the other stuff. The bottom level is still a little bit of a clusterfuck, but that's just over information and not knowing who to listen to.
Yep.
And all those things. So with all of that, where are your thoughts on how that's all progressed?
God, you know, like you said, the social media is a blessing, but it's also, you know, it has many, many issues. And, you know, like you said, when you compare it to, you know, back in the day, like, let's go back to the magazines where I was sort of that gatekeeper. And I would say, you know, this information really isn't consistent with what we want to say in the magazine, which is a good thing, because for those people that, you know, that can't make their own decisions, it gives them that information and keeps them on track, and they're getting consistent information. They're learning and they're progressing. That's a good thing. But, you know, we wouldn't have Justin Bieber if it wasn't for YouTube, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, that is like the good and the bad. You know what I'm saying? Some people love Justin Bieber, other people hate Justin Bieber. But if it wasn't for YouTube, there probably wouldn't be a Justin Bieber. And, you know, and arguably he's one of the most people know who Justin Bieber is. And so, you know, the social media platforms allow these other people to be heard who may not have been heard. And like you said, good and bad, because it could be a 16-year-old kid in his basement who's giving advice on how to bench press. Not necessarily bad. Maybe he has something that another 16-year-old will hear, or whatever it is, but it's probably, like you said, not the same advice as Dave Tate teaching you how to bench press.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and so, you know, I don't know if it's good or, you know, like I said,
I ping pong back.
Yeah, you know, it's good and it's bad. You know, you can have people putting out really crappy advice, and screwing people up in the gym or with what they're eating, or, you know what I'm saying, what they're doing with their diets. You know, there's a lot of quackery that's out there. But it allows the individual to decide. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Again, whether that's good or bad, you know, can that person really make that decision that they should listen to this person's advice? But it allows them to have that opportunity, I guess.
Yeah, the one thing that I wonder is, in the magazine era and age, you know, each magazine kind of catered to a different demographic. Right. So Powerlifting USA, powerlifters, you know, Flex was more competitive bodybuilders, Muscle Fitness, more general across the board. Fitness, and then, you know, Men's Health, you know, a little bit, then hers, you know, so you would find your silo fairly quick. Right. But then when you're in that silo, you're in that echo chamber of that silo.
Yes.
Right. Unless you're reading Muscle and Fitness, was kind of covered, you know, all silos. Right. But typically what would happen is you'd find the silo subscriptions as all the other ones kind of go away. Then that's kind of where you just kind of lean into that, to where we still have those silos today, but the role of, say, the Muscle and Fitness is more prominent. You know, people being exposed to all the different silos all the time. Where what I wonder is that good or bad, right? Because is it preventing people from getting into their own subculture, you know, to be able to advance really faster? Or it does that keep them in this dryer, you know, just spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and not really knowing what to do, because each one of these silos, the periodization, you know, everything is very different, similar in a lot of ways, but very different in different cultures, you know, that you're in with that. But See, I ping pong back and forth. But the interesting thing is
you talk yourself out.
Yeah, exactly. Because now you're able to learn from those different silos and to take that information and then to apply it. The strength athletes are eating better now than they ever have. The mobility, and there's more than it's ever had. And I don't know if that would happen.
Better recovery.
Yes. Because if it was flex, you were probably not going to see a whole lot of powerlifting type of stuff or mobility type of stuff. That would be in like men's health, right? So I don't know. It's this ping pong back and forth.
Know. You right, like you said, you sort of start talking yourself out of it. My question that I have on that is where does it go from here as far as the social media? Because almost everybody has their own platform now. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And eventually it's like almost, this is kind of one of my theories, if you will, is that everybody has their own platform, and it almost becomes like the experts or with influencers, whatever you want to call us and them. I like to call myself an expert. I'm not just an influencer. I actually have the background to do this. So an expert, but whatever you want to lump us all in as, is that eventually it's going to be so commonplace that getting a response from your favorite fitness influencer is going to be like getting a response from your buddy. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I'm saying? It's just going to be so commonplace. Where is that going to hold any weight now? And so what is are we going to go back to some sort of vetted, do you see what I'm saying? Like it's gone from being, vetted information to less vetting to it's just a free for all. You can put, as long as you've got a phone, you can say anything you want on any topic and put it out there. Eventually, is there going to be so much of that nobody no longer trusts?
Yeah. Well, history repeats itself.
And then we're getting, I don't know what it's going to look like, but are we going to get
GPT?
Yeah. Right?
Yeah. But where I have a little pushback on that is most people today still don't know how to search Google properly.
True. Very.
Right. So to assume everybody's going to be
very true.
So if everybody's going to be, it's a false assumption that everybody's going to be jumping on GPTs. Right. I already see that now, just when I speak to people that
they can't even
don't
Google.
use it at all. Right.
They can't even Google.
Yeah. And, kids today, like I said, they don't even type in the Google search. They're just putting in the URL, whatever it is, and there's the answer. But the answer is now, interesting enough, on the first page are usually going to be videos or it's Q&As. So here's like the FAQs.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So as a content provider, now you're wondering, well, how do I get my answer in the FAQ? Because the algorithm's pulling that to be able to throw that answer in there, and it's being pulled from some article somewhere.
Yep.
So what is the SEO for that? Because anymore, that's almost all page one of a search. Right. So you got the sponsored ads and then videos and then the FAQs, and now you're pretty much on page two. So it kind of, in a way, it is doing what you're saying.
True. Right.
Where the authenticity is the big thing now, where that's kind of popping up, which is going to be a weird one, because if somebody's new to the industry, they're not going to really have that. Right. They're going to find somebody that they really like and kind of emulate, the same way everybody's done through the course of history, with all that. So that's where it becomes a little weird, because who are they going to try to emulate? I don't want to say steal or copy, because most don't, some do, but most really don't do that. I like this person, I'd like to do what they're doing, so they're going to look at the model that you used and kind of follow that model. But if it's distorted on who those people really are, then it's going to lead people to a false reality that's not going to work. Because they don't have the accolades to be able to learn from.
No,
which is interesting with that. So jumping off this topic, because we can go on this forever. Wow. With nutrition and performance, how have you seen that evolve from a hypertrophy standpoint? Not since Muscle and Fitness, because that would be an 8-hour conversation, but just recently, over the last decade.
Well,
Actually, let me make it a little more targeted, because I believe you were the first person to create a pre, peri, and post nutrition plan.
Yeah.
I mean, if we go way back,
yes.
I couldn't find anybody before,
Right.
I did look some, not a lot, but some, to be able to know that. That was a different thing.
Yes.
That was a big pivot,
This
change.
This is 2013.
Yeah. So what led you to that?
Well, I mean, in 2013, the research on protein timing that was coming out of University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Bob Wolf's lab, it means nothing to you, I'm sure, the name, but they were doing most of the protein stuff, looking at what happens when you fed somebody an hour after they did a leg session and whatnot. And based on that data, you wanted to recover immediately after, within an hour, getting a protein source in, right, to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Now, some of the data, and like we've talked about before, there's more and more research looking at more specific topics. But some of the data now is showing that, particularly if you're untrained, that anabolic window may be longer than an hour, right? Much longer than an hour. And so people are now saying, well, is there really a post-workout anabolic window? And is it critical? And my answer is still yes, because even if you can spike muscle protein synthesis 24 hours after you work out, just as great as you can an hour after, why would you want to wait 24 hours to eat after you?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, for, how many spikes in muscle protein synthesis could you have if you ate immediately after you worked out, and then 3 hours after, another 3 hours after that? That's one of the things we do know, right? Is that, about every 3 hours or so, if you have enough protein, enough leucine, the amino acid, branched chain amino acid leucine, you're going to spike muscle protein synthesis. So there's a big debate now about whether or not you need the anabolic window, how many hours you should eat after you work out, what's critical. I've always said within an hour. Most people are saying, well, that's not really important. You could go 3 hours, you could go 4 hours. Maybe trained athletes have a shorter anabolic window than untrained athletes. So it may not be as critical. But again, most people on social media now are saying you don't need to eat within an hour after you train. But I'm saying, why would you not want to eat?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, looking at it from a psychological standpoint, if you can build the habit of having it right after, then it will always be there. It's always you're done training, you got to go to the grocery store before you go home, you're doing this other stuff. And
that's exactly my other point, that I like you said, I have pre and post nutrition, right? And one of the ingredients I like pre and post is beta alanine. Okay. If you look at the research on beta alanine, it was done mainly by Jay Hoffman, who I'm a good friend of. We worked together at the University of Connecticut. He didn't give it to them pre and post workout. He gave it to them at random times of day, right? So people who look at my pre and post recommendations for beta, I'm like, well, that's stupid. The research didn't give it to them pre and post workout. It gave it to them on random times. I'm like, well, when would you be thinking about supplementing with beta alanine? 4 o'clock when you're in your office at work, or before you work out and after you work out? Do you know what I mean? And so the reason that I'm putting it here isn't because the research had them take it pre and post workout, but we know beta alanine is a mild neurostimulant, so you get a little boost for your workout. We know that post workout, you can absorb nutrients better immediately post workout. So why not get it at times where it's going to be valuable, you're going to absorb it possibly better, and you're thinking about taking supplements. Like you said, if you make that a habit, then you're going to consistently be taking, and something like beta alanine is not a supplement that's acutely important. It needs to build up like creatine. You need to take it long enough. So if you're taking a pre and post workout, like you said, you've created a habit. It makes sense around that time. So those are sort of the reasons that I'm still, even though people are debating whether there's a post-workout window, is like, create that habit, you'll be consistent with it. And the other thing is, how do you feel after you work out? Would you ever come in here and do a massive squat day and then not eat for 3-4 hours after?
It would have to be a really hard training session that
where you're like almost sick.
Where you're just dead. But
again, like
you're going to want to.
You're going to want to. And like, let's say it was more endurance training, like bodybuilding style, where you're doing super high reps and you're depleting your glycogen. What's going to make you feel better? After a workout that depleted your glycogen? Eating something, you know what I mean? Like consuming some nutrients is not only going to help you recover better, but it's going to help you feel better, you know? Like, and so even though like I think that's changed, whether or not you need to have that post-workout.
Well, I think with that debate though, they leave one big assumption out because they're assuming that they're meeting their protein needs per day.
Right. Yes.
Right. So that's, to me, it's a false assumption because a lot of younger strength athletes have worked with. They don't, so the post-training shake or whatever, that's 60 grams of protein that if they're not training, they're not getting in their day.
Exactly. And that's adding to their total.
For some, it might be a third.
Right. Yes.
Of the total protein that they have for the day. So if they're going to make that broad assumption that the protein requirements are being met, I see where they're coming from. Because it's always there, it's always available.
Yes.
But that's a pretty big leap to make in the real world.
Agreed. And you're right. My personal protein intake, a third of it is around workouts. It's my pre and post workout. A third of my protein intake for the day is literally around my.
So before you came out with your protocol, there was pre-workouts, right?
Oh yeah, of course.
Like just
there were pre-workouts,
the overstim,
but it was mainly, that's exactly what it was. When I launched Pre-Gym in 2013 with a 20-gram scoop, most other brands never went over 8 grams of total.
Yeah, the tiny little scoop.
Yeah, it was all stimulants. You know what I mean? And so, I'm trying to teach them, look, take your
Some of that was kind of weird though, because the math didn't add up.
Yes.
Right? It's like the weight of this powder in this scoop.
Well, it was, they called it, that was the other issue. They called it super concentrated. And that's kind of why I started a supplement brand. I never intended to start a supplement brand. But when I was at Muscle and Fitness, I had to review these products and I had to tell my editors, I can't give this product a good review. There's 500 milligrams of creatine in here. You need far more than 5, and they're calling it super concentrated. And it's like, creatine is already concentrated.
I was going to say, how can you reduce a singular amino acid down?
They were literally lying. And that's when I said, you know what, somebody's got to step in here and change the industry, because this is going down a dangerous path. This is why no one believes that supplements work, is because you're putting 500 milligrams of creatine. Creatine is very effective, not at 500 milligrams, but if you didn't know that and you were taking creatine, but not knowing it's only 500 milligrams because it's a proprietary blend, not telling you what's in there, you would think the creatine didn't work. And so that's when I finally stepped in and said, you know what, I think it's time that we create a product. And that literally becomes the educational tool. As these are the supplements, this is what you want to take before you work out. This is what you want to take after you work out.
What should somebody take before they work out?
In my opinion, I mean, and again, it depends on what your goal is. But like you said, I take creatine before, and again, creatine is not going to work acutely, right? Yeah. Okay. But we now know that even a single large dose of creatine can enhance brain function. And so there may be some acute effects of creatine, but again, it gets down to that sort of ritual. Like, when would you take your creatine? When would be
how do you, outside of like caffeine or a major stim, how are you going to measure acute effects when you're training? because the training mind state is going to be different than a non-training mind state.
Exactly.
So that gets real dicey now.
Yes. And so so I would say creatine, I would do pre-workout, beta-alanine pre-workout. I would consider betaine, which is trimethylglycine, as the research is showing improvements in strength, power, as well as muscle hypertrophy. You talked about caffeine, probably one of the only ones acutely that'll raise your strength levels, but you're not talking about 100 milligrams. We're talking, you've got to be 300, 400, maybe even 500 milligrams of caffeine to get that acute effect. And then I recommend branched chains not because of the leucine. Everybody focuses on leucine with branched chains stimulating muscle protein synthesis, but I focus on branched chains because valine, which is one of the 3 branched chain amino acids, blocks the uptake of tryptophan by the brain. And when tryptophan gets taken up by the brain, it gets converted into serotonin, which gives you that sort of groggy.
So then tryptophan would be in the essential amino acid.
Tryptophan would be in essential amino acids, which is why I like branched chain amino acids.
Because it's pulling that out.
It's pulling that out, and it's keeping that serotonin production down, which is going to help prevent fatigue.
Mm-hmm. And then what about during? Because so 10 years ago, maybe that started to become in vogue with Vertargo or whatever what was the first maltodextrin, maybe? I'm trying to think of what that.
But the waxy maize.
So that was kind of like actually before that was probably like Mountain Dew or just, sugar.
Right.
And then it kind of evolved.
Gatorade.
But what I've often wondered is with that coming in, how much was really based on science? And then the second question with that is how much of it was based on science, but also insulin? Because insulin became a big part of bodybuilding, and it makes sense, if you're using insulin, while you're training, to be able to shuttle more.
If you're using, you
see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it's that's the one thing I've always wondered, is because a lot of the proponents of that, that was also part of the protocol. So you need 100 grams of this, carbohydrate while you're training, but yet I'm not telling everybody that you're taking hemoglobin, which is going to pull that uptake, which then defaults back to, well, how many grams could you actually pull in during training?
Look, for most weight lifting workouts, unless you're doing, like a Lee Priest 20 sets for biceps, what you take before you work out should
cover.
Yes. You know what I mean? As far as, do you need extra carbs if you're running 2 hours? But you know what I mean? In the gym, you could wait till after. Do you know Milos?
Yeah.
So he's a big proponent of during workouts. He likes to give essential amino acids, simple carbs, but again, his athletes are all enhanced.
You see, that's where I run into the roadblock.
Yeah.
So I can
will it
understand.
Matter?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Will it matter for the natural bodybuilder? I don't mean competitive guy. I just mean somebody who just, wants to look and look leaner and bigger, right? Will it matter if they have carbs during the workout? Probably not. Will it help maintain their glycogen? Will it keep cortisol down? Possibly. But again, you can talk about testosterone cortisol ratio being an anabolic indicator. We know so little about cortisol. We know so little about the human body. We don't know how muscle grows.
Yeah.
Like let's get anybody who tells you they know how muscle grows is feeding you a line of crap. We don't know. We know certain processes that happen to lead to muscle growth, but there are so many things, like you increase muscle protein synthesis, right? But then there's things called microRNAs that then break that all down. Like, why would the body bother synthesizing it and then just break it all down? We don't know. You know what I mean? We don't know. There's so little we know about muscle growth. There's so little we know about what growth hormone does. There's so little we know about what cortisol does, right? Everybody thinks you need to shut down cortisol. It's the devil. It's like our body wouldn't make cortisol if it didn't serve a function.
Yeah. Well, there's so many other factors too, where the last podcast I recorded was with a former colleague of yours, Dwayne Jackson.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh,
so
God.
we were talking about the biopsychosocial model or whatever. So you
Brilliant
got the biology,
yes.
The biology that plays into, then the psychology, then the sociology, then using a Penn model, the cross bridge where all that. There's a lot of things that play into this.
So many.
When you're trying to pull one in isolation, it's cool for research and study and all that, and can provide thought ideas and stuff like that. But when you really step back and you look at all these things that are influencing from a macro level, it really becomes really dicey to speak in absolutes, which science shouldn't do, because that's not science.
No, right. Exactly. Exactly. And it's kind of like you said, with taking a supplement acutely for your workout, how do you determine what, you know what I mean? There's so many things that change every single workout that you go and do. A workout today's workout isn't tomorrow's workout. Mm-hmm. Even if you did the same, you know what I mean? If every day you did your bench workout on Monday, this week, and even if you're planning to do the same exact workout next week, those two workouts wouldn't be the same, based on your physiology, based on your psychology, based on something somebody said to you as you're walking in to the gym. You know what I'm saying? Something you thought about, something you ate, didn't eat, there's so many variables, just so many variables.
And so on the nutrition part, if we're to back out and just look at the major pillars that somebody's going to need to make progress training. Yes. When you came up, it was low fat, right? So,
it was,
and
so stupid.
Yeah, it'd be really fun. And maybe you've done this to look at to where the origins of that actually came from. That would be interesting, but it doesn't matter because we're
and that concept is still around. Mm-hmm. There's still bodybuilders who still believe in that low fat model. There's still so many.
Yeah.
Still.
So what would be optimal for most?
Optimal as far as fat intake?
Just as far as basic macronutrients.
I break down the macros starting with protein. I would get at least 1 gram per pound of body weight. It's so easy. You can argue all day whether it's 0.7, 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. Just round it up to 1, make it easy for everybody. So if you're 200 pounds, try to get 200 grams of protein per day. As far as fat, I like to go for about half the body weight. So if you're 200 pounds, get about 100 grams of fat per day. And I'm not a no saturated fat kind of guy. In fact, if you look at the data on saturated fat in testosterone levels, those who eat more saturated fat tend to have higher testosterone levels. So we need saturated fat. So I like to, I don't call out saturated fat as the devil. I think if you get a balance of saturated and, mono and polyunsaturated, you're good. And then carbs, I like to sort of make up the balance. Mm-hmm. So, are you trying to bulk? Are you trying to gain, get stronger? Then carbs should be on the higher side, maybe 2 grams per pound of body weight. If you're trying to get leaner, then maybe whittle those carbs down somewhere around 1 gram per pound of body weight.
So carbs then become the manipulating macro.
Yeah, exactly.
How does the protein intake change with age? Because you're the same age that I am, so there's a certain point.
So unfortunately for the both of us, our ability to synthesize protein is not as effective or efficient as a 20-year-old. And so we need more protein. So whereas a 20-year-old can eat maybe 30 grams of protein, get a nice spike in muscle protein synthesis, you and I have to eat probably 40, 50, maybe even double that to get that same spike.
Which is going to essentially then pull the carbs down.
And then, because you're getting more calories from your protein, right? Again, if you're concerned about body composition.
Yeah. I get it. It's just, I wonder where, because a lot of these things just kind of bubble up through trial and error.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, to where, you know, you wonder if that kind of explains to where the older population will speak about pulling carbs. And that's the main narrative. Is it really that they're doing, or they have found that they have to keep their protein higher, you know, to be able to not lose muscle? Because at a certain point in time, it's going to be real hard to gain muscle, especially if your training age is high. I guess if you just start at 40, probably a different story.
Exactly.
But most listening would probably have a decade of training age behind them anyhow, where when you see the absolutes that get thrown out, sometimes I like to kind of play with them in my mind. Like, so where did this come from? Is it just this, or is it something?
Interesting, yes.
Is it working for reasons that they're saying, or is it working for reasons that they're not stating, but they don't know? Right. And that happens a lot with training. You know, it's, you know, dynamic effort box squats or whatever. You know, people will razz on that for a million different reasons on why it won't work, but maybe it works just simply because it's reinforcing technical skill. You know, so there's multiple reasons, and some usually the ones that might be most responsible aren't being discussed. And if they are, they're being discussed by PhDs and the like that most people aren't going to listen to be able to say, maybe it's that. Maybe it isn't the low. Maybe they're not a proponent of low carb. They're a proponent of a little higher protein.
Good point.
You know, so it's trying to teach people to think like that becomes the problem. You know, the challenge. With all that. So if we step away from the macros and we get into the micros, we can get into, you know, conversations of processed versus non-processed foods and its impact on the micronutrients, if there even is an impact on the micronutrients. It's kind of the same conversation of don't drink diet soda because it's going to kill you. So I guess the option is just to drink the sugar one.
Drink sugar,
you know, so it's so when you're looking at the micronutrients in, say, the processed foods, is that what's being stated? You know, across the board, you know, only eat organic, don't eat the processed shit, because the processed shit is going to lead to lower testosterone. We've seen this a million times.
Right.
So what's the reality here? Because your liver's going to filter a lot of this shit out. That's kind of the,
you know, that's exactly what I say. Like, you know, people are worried about, you know, sucralose, and it's like, you know, you have a liver, if you had any concept of the toxins that you're inhaling and absorbing as you touch throughout your day, you'd be horrified. But your body filters. That's what your body is designed to do, you know, to survive. And so it filters all that out. We have the capacity. Now, you can argue there's some ingredients that maybe we shouldn't be getting. Erythritol, for example, has recently been found to acutely, so a single serving, to change clotting factors and increase blood clots.
And where would that be found?
Erythritol, it's found in, you know, one of those Bali drinks, you know, BALI, they're like low carb.
Yeah.
Like erythritol's in there, a lot of protein bars. We'll have it, some protein powders, other packaged food, low carb. Low carbs because it's a sugar alcohol. Okay. You know, and so, occasionally we find ingredients that maybe we don't want to be ingesting, at least at a high. But even at lower doses, the body's designed to filter that out. That's what the body does. Like I said, we're inhaling toxins all the time. We're absorbing them through our skin. And like I said, these people who are so worried about everything that's in their food, you'd be horrified if you knew, like I said, what you're inhaling, what you're touching and absorbing through the skin. But yet your body is designed to filter all that.
With some of the micronutrients that most of the people that I know that do get their blood work done are typically always low, you know, magnesium, D, and for many DHEA, you know, they're in B6, you know, those, were they always low? You get what I'm saying? Yeah. Or is this just a recent phenomenon to where now these are lower than they were 20, 30 years ago?
I mean, maybe they are lower because, like you said, there is more processed foods options that we have, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And versus whole food. And so maybe it's lower today, but also, you could argue that even whole foods today have less of the nutrient value that food had, conventionally raised cattle, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
The meat, at least the fat component, is going to be lower in vitamin E, lower in omega-3s, lower in CLA, things like that. And so some of the farming practices may be responsible for some of the lower nutrient components that people are seeing.
With some of these deficiencies that will arise when you're looking at supplementation of those, there's, we'll use D as an example, and I'll let you kind of speak it through because I'm speaking from layman's terms here. I know a lot of people that will supplement with the D, but then the D won't go up. And that could either because it's, not with K2 or because the magnesium is actually the problem. And once they fix the magnesium, the D. So I think with a lot of people, they get into this place to where they can see this is where the deficiency is, but they're not good at realizing what is the actual cause of that deficiency. And in some cases, just supplementing what is deficient may not make the difference. Right. So how would you explain that in a better way?
God, I don't know if I could explain it any better, but, everybody has unique biochemistry, and so what works, for you, a certain person could take ashwagandha and their testosterone doubles. Another person will take ashwagandha, they'll get nothing. Same age, same testosterone levels, but their biochemistry is different, the way that they, I think we talked about this before with the training. How do you tell if a supplement's working acutely when your training can be so different, but an individual can also be, so different. And so it's nice to have the blood values and understand the biochemistry and to sort of answer some, but it's just so complex that it's almost impossible. It kind of gets back to the good and the bad of social media. There's so many complexities to these concepts, whether it's supplementing, whether it's training, that for the normal layperson to really understand and how to fix their vitamin D levels, I don't know how to, unless you're sitting down with that individual and going through each person. This is, it's the problem with what I do and talking to the masses.
Yes,
is because what I'm telling you might work for 55% of you, but for 45% of you, you need something different. And so there's almost a disservice in that because I have to speak to the general.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But what people want are, what are the supplements I should take?
Yeah.
That would be
and again, we could go down a list of here's creatine, beta alanine, but for you, based on the blood work that you had, based on some of these conditions you have, based on your diet, I might add this or that, or not take this. Yeah. And so they don't get that individualized.
Well, I think the other thing that they miss is when we're speaking about the micronutrients or supplements, we're really talking about things that are in the margins.
Yes.
Right. So if it's a sphere, they're worried about, that if it's the earth, I guess the atmosphere around the earth.
Right.
But they're not, but the earth sucks. That's the hard conversation to get through to people is, how about you just forget about all that, focus on the macros, focus on making sure the protein intake is in there, and then see what happens to those other things.
Right.
Because in a lot of cases, those other things would probably be resolved if their lunch isn't gummy bears and a Pepsi. and their snack, a flavored toothpick and a cigarette, stuff,
yes.
stuff like that. And the interesting thing with this whole fitness strength space is everybody agrees on that. But all the narrative that we'll see, the sexy narrative, the shiny thing, is always the things on the margins, which leads that general population to ask those such questions as, what supplements do I take? What food should I eat?
Right.
Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
Where they don't like that common answer of, clean everything up and eat foods that have a lot of different colors and not Skittles.
Right. Can't I just take a supplement?
Yes, which would be great. But it's not the reality of all that.
Exactly.
And so with the kind of put a ribbon on this nutrition stuff over at least now, because you're still very active in the space, where do you see the misconceptions around nutrition and supplementation?
Misconceptions on nutrition. I think, we sort of talked about that post-workout window not being important. And like I said, sure, you could still spike muscle protein synthesis, 8 hours, 10 hours after. But why would you want to? And so I think what they go astray on is these messages. And even Brad Schoenfeld, who put out the first review questioning whether or not there's a post-workout window, has even stated that although based on the research that's been done debating whether there's a post-workout window, he would not recommend anyone who's seriously trying to get stronger or bigger to do that, to not eat. He would say, I would recommend you eat immediately if your goal is to maximize your results. But that message isn't getting out to the people. The message of the details about, well, we found that you can wait 24 hours to eat protein after you work out and still get the same spike in muscle protein synthesis. And so all people hear is, I can wait 24 hours. There's no discussion of, well, if you wait 24 hours, you're missing all those different spikes in muscle protein synthesis that you could have gotten. And all those spikes throughout your day add up to build muscle. If you're waiting nobody would wait 24 hours, but if you did, muscle breakdown is going to go down. Right? It's going to go up. And you're going to lose. That's why. Do you know any powerlifters who intermittent fast? No, you couldn't get enough calories, and your fasting window is so big where you're not eating that you're breaking down muscle tissue. Are you going to lose muscle? Probably not, because you'll eat again and it'll come back up, but it never is allowed to come back up to the point where you can start building muscle, which is why intermittent fasting sucks for body, but great for health, great for fat loss, right? So I think people get too caught up in those details of like I was telling you with beta alanine, well, the research shows that they gave it to them not pre and post workout. So why would you give it to them pre and post workout? Well, it's just a better option if you really think about when you would want to take beta alanine. So I think one of the things, they get too caught up in those details, and then they can't really think critically. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And so they hear, it doesn't matter if you eat protein right after you work out. You can wait 24 hours. And so I'm not going to worry. And then it's like, you got the take-home message, but you sort of missed.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to me because, and I don't think this is a new thing, lifters and people that train are impatient. They want all the gains now. And it's the reason I say that's not a new thing is because we are all that way too, right? So to assume that we never were is bullshit. But if I was to frame this in a different context of, you're married and you haven't had sex in a week, and it's guaranteed that your wife's going to want to have sex with you 1 hour after training. You have the time, she has the time. If you wait past that, maybe 3 hours later, 4 hours later, but that's not guaranteed. Right. What options everybody going to take? Right. And all I did was take the same concept philosophy and apply it to a different situation, and everybody's ripping their pants down within the first hour.
Of course.
Because it's guaranteed that it's going to happen.
Right.
Where 3 or 4 hours later, you say something stupid, she gets pissed off, and it's another 3 weeks till you get laid because you said something stupid.
I love it.
So it's, it makes, from that common sense, to kind of back it off and look at it from a common sense
that's
standpoint.
what you really have to do, is make it to a common sense standpoint, because and I understand these concepts are very difficult for the layperson to understand. That's why they can only hear, it doesn't matter when you eat after you train. That's all they can hear. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Answer solved. I don't have to worry. It makes it easier for me. I don't have to think about it, which I think what I have found, most people don't want to think about it. They just want you to tell them what to do.
Yes. And that's fine. As long as the person that's telling them is framing it in a way that they can understand.
Yes.
Right. Because it's the one thing that I've noticed, or it's always been there, but I've been more aware of, is when you're trying to speak to a lay person about these certain things, A, they don't care. B, they just want to be told what to do. And then C, they have no frame of reference.
Yes.
Right. So the sex thing I just threw out there is kind of giving a frame of reference to be able to help with that.
Yes.
The longevity standpoint, like this stuff takes time. And, the general assumption is people don't have patience. Well, they do. They graduated from high school. That was 12 years. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
so if you can pin it to something that they already know, if they work in a completely different field, but they have, an MBA. Well, the MBA took them a few years to be able to, they know, things of value take time. But if the coach or the practitioner is not framing it in a way that they've already experienced it, then they're not going to get it. And then the practitioner or trainer or whatever is going to just say those people are stupid. Yeah. They're not stupid,
no,
right? Because if they were to flip the script and start speaking to you about their area of proficiency, then you're an idiot.
Exactly. That's what I always tell people that I'll be explaining some concept to people, and they're like, how do you know so much? And I'm like, I only know so much about a small like a small area. I'm like, you're a lawyer. Like, you know a lot about law that I have no idea about. It's just, this is my area. You know what I mean? Like, so no, they're not.
Yeah. And the best will be able to connect those dots,
yes,
to be able to communicate effectively, with each other.
Yeah. And put in common sense terms, like you said, in a perspective that they have.
Mm-hmm. And the good client, athlete, or whatever it's going to be, will also assume that accountability and responsibility that they don't understand, to be able to say, can you explain this in a better way?
Yes.
Or a different way? And this is where the 20-year-old coach that's been doing it for 3 or 4 years isn't going to have a good answer, right? Because they're going to have one canned answer.
Yeah.
You do this for 40 years, you got 80 canned answers, if not more, because you can address it from all these different angles to be able to kind of get into it. With the training and hypertrophy training, it's when you first got in, the studies were rare. It's what was it? The NSCA journal was really about the only thing that was out there.
Yeah.
When I was in college, I found the Soviet Sport Review, but I don't know if I'd really say that was a journal per se.
Yeah,
it's just translations of things, and that's changed. Radically. The funnies come in, a lot of the studies have come in with all that. And it's interesting how we're, for a long time, it was all studies that seemed to be around the eccentrics, and now we're into the stretch.
The stretch.
So is the next the concentric, and then the contraction, so it's, because one will be overemphasized.
Yes.
Right. The eccentrics was overemphasized. Now the stretch, it may be overemphasized.
I think you're right.
To where, what's the next is going to probably be the concentric, like the concentric is really important, and then
it's all important, right?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? But
yeah.
And it kind of gets back to like what you're saying, the layperson hears the importance of stretch. Now that's all they're focusing on.
Yeah. And programs being built completely around it.
Right.
So it's how have things changed, in the last decade? Let's just go the last 5 years, because it seems to be picking up speed, or it's not, or it's just content's being produced at a greater rate.
It is.
Because the science-backed training, or whatever they call it, science-based training, is now a buzzword catchphrase.
True.
Which is in there. So over the past 5 years, what advancements have really been made? Yeah.
And like you said, is it more people talking about it? But I think more people talking about it has made more research, because it's bringing up those questions like, do supersets do that? Would it matter if I only did this half of the range of, it's because we all wondered why Jay Cutler did his bench press all down here. Everybody that was a bodybuilder only stopped at the halfway point of the bench press. Why? Why is that? Why did Perillo stretch? In between? And those were, very painful stretching. And so, we've all had those questions, is it that important to stay? And now that those questions are being asked and more people are thinking about them, there's more people who have access to a lab or a colleague or that are now doing those studies. So I think talking about it is important, but I don't think it's just more people talking about it. I think the talking is creating some action.
Yeah.
By, there's more people interested, like you said, big muscle paying for it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's more Brad Schoenfields who are just interested in, if you did this on the barbell curl, will it build your biceps more? Whereas before we had to like extrapolate that stuff. So I do think that there's more research coming out. And like you said, I think we're sort of right now, the hot topic is the stretch. How critical is that stretch? If you look at the data right now, it seems to be an important factor in muscle growth in a number of ways. There was a study, I don't know if you saw, on calf raises where they only did the initial half of the range of motion, right?
Yeah.
They didn't even go into peak contraction. And it was in women, but untrained women. But again, they grew their calves twice as much as the group doing full range of motion and the ones doing just peak contraction, right?
Yeah.
Twice as much, one study, okay?
Yeah.
But then if you look at a study on triceps where they compared one arm doing the overhead, right, which is stretching the long head, and the other hand doing press down, the overhead grew the triceps more than the press down did, significantly. I think it was 30-40% more. And again, you're stretching that one end of that, biarticulate muscle, right? And then there was one on leg extensions where it was either seated up or laying back, where you're stretching, right, the rectus femoris, and the leaning back resulted in greater muscle growth. So there's some evidence that the stretch component is important. And one thing we know about stretch, right, is that you stretch a muscle, it can contract with more force.
Yeah.
Right? And
so now we're getting in force.
And so now we're sort of in these studies seeing, okay, what happens when we take advantage of that stretch? Does it actually lead to greater muscle growth? Possibly. We can't. There's a lot of people saying yes, it'll lead to greater muscle growth. But like I said before, we don't know anything about muscle growth. We have a lot of theories. We're trying to piece it all together. But I think the evidence is suggesting that the stretch is an important component to muscle hypertrophy. If you look at the data that we're now gathering, and then if you just sort of look at the way these high-level bodybuilders were training, like I said, most of the top level Olympia guys do not do a full bench press. They don't do the top half, like the ego lifters that come in and just do they only do the bottom half, right? Which is typically the harder part of the range of motion on the bench press for most people. So a lot of people think that's cheating when in fact it might actually be making that exercise harder to do because they're staying in that weakest range on the bench press, right? Again, it depends on where your weak spot is. But for most people, I think it's down low. And so if you look at the way they were training and now we're seeing the evidence in the lab, it seems like it's important that the stretch.
Yeah, that seemed to have come on the back end of the effective reps, which was the narrative before that.
Right. Yeah.
Which, that gets weird as well, because if you're in 100% in that camp, then anything to failure would not be as effective. Than anything past failure, force reps or drop sets or whatever, become worthless.
Yes.
More to say. And so that brings up the question marks there, as well, is, how does that play into all that? And then how does somebody actually navigate all this? Because now I shouldn't go to failure. I should be like 2 reps shy of failure. Right. But you have to define what failure means, which becomes the first problem, right?
Is it a break in form? Is it absolute? You can't move.
And how is it anchored?
Yes.
Like if you're coaching somebody, how are you going to anchor what that really is? Or how are you going to test it in a lab? And I do think they're doing a better job of that, of actually making people work hard, for that. So they're trying to get that, that one answered, but that becomes that other question that, you can watch some people and it's all about the effective reps, and other ones are, if that's the case, then why do anything past a triple really heavy? Right. Which brings up the other components of that whole conversation. So how do you navigate that one?
Yeah. I mean, it's almost impossible for you and I to navigate and make sense out of that, let alone, you know what I mean? And, a layperson to be able to navigate that on their own. There's so much going on that we don't know. There's so much that we can assume. But again, I think it gets back to, there's a reason why the programs that I put out are they're based on a transformation, not getting somebody to break a world record, right?
Yeah.
When you're like what you're doing, to break a world record, you can't just read a recipe and go, okay, today's day is this, and then I'm going to do this and train this way and that way. It's very individualized. You change shit up on people, I'm sure, within the minute.
Yeah.
You've changed what you had planned to do with them based on how they're performing, how they're right. And so it's, there's a reason why I don't do that, or why I don't teach people how to do Olympic lifting. That's not something you can do in the format that I work with. That needs a coach watching that individual's biomechanics. There's no way that I can teach them how to make sense out of how to do a clean.
No. Well, from a training density standpoint, it's not going to make sense either.
True.
It's just going to take them more time.
Right.
So if it's a stretch or the effective reps or whatever we're talking about there, so let's stay on the stretch part. If somebody is to put that in their program and build a program around that, I would assume there's going to become a period of time their body is going to become adapted to that. That's why periodization exists in the first place.
Everything works, nothing works forever. That's
exactly,
my
right?
favorite saying.
The effective reps would be kind of the same thing there. And when the way that I kind of see the hypertrophy training and the bodybuilding from that strength perspective is this is still part of an off-season block that hypertrophy has got to be integrated into any athlete's model. Right. And sometimes it will be in its own block. Sometimes it'll be integrated in with, other blocks that are kind of physically structured throughout that. But where bodybuilding has seemed as an outsider looking in until fairly recently to avoid all periodization at all costs. You know, it's
8 to 12 reps.
Yeah, like bro split. You know, here's a number of sets. Change the movement. Just do whatever you want to do all the time.
Yes.
Over and
right.
You know, and everybody will have success with that for a while, and then it's going to stop. And when that stops, and you get into, I think it might have been Bill Kramer was the first with a Western periodization model.
Yes.
Yellow book many, many years ago, which was basically what powerlifters were doing before, you know, before the whole thing. But it might have been to the best of my knowledge, the first time it was actually trying to be implemented into bodybuilding. Fred Hatfield, maybe before that, you know, to try to be able to put that in there. Have you seen the same thing? The periodization being more integrated into bodybuilding models?
I guess I would say, yeah. I mean, I'm partially responsible. Probably one of my most well-known programs that was at bodybuilding.com. Literally, I don't know how many millions of people have done it. It was called Shortcut to Size. It's microcycles. It's 12 to 15 reps week 1, 9 to 11 week 2, 6 to 8 week 3, 3 to 5 week 4. Repeat.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, 12 to 15, 9 to 11, 6 to 8, 3 to 5. Go, you know, repeat. People, the results that people got from doing that, because they were never changing up their rep ranges before. And so the strength gains and the hypertrophy gains, there were people gaining 30 pounds of muscle, and people were saying that's impossible. You know, it's like, it's all documented at bodybuilding.com. And so, you know, I would like to think that I'm responsible for bringing some of that to the bodybuilding world, you know, in that way, because almost every one of my programs is periodized.
Yeah. Was there backlash when that came out?
No, I mean, other than just other experts, you know, claiming, well, that can't work. There's nothing special about, there is nothing special. It's a microcycle. I didn't make it up.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I just popularized it with this crowd of people. And so I think the only backlash is just people trying to disprove, you know, that it can work. Well, I don't know why you would want to disprove microcycles.
Yeah, well, how? I mean,
but you know, I mean,
you can't.
You know, the hate that's out. You know, it's just people just hating, basically.
Well, it's in some programs, some philosophies of training. So I'll take it a little step higher. Evolves cults around that philosophy of training. You know, and that's kind of where some of that backlash comes. If it's a HIIT model type of training versus a more high volume.
Precisely.
You know, which has been very interesting to watch. And I know you've seen this as well because you're paying attention to it, how those will come and go. You know, so you'll have an athlete that's predominantly HIIT type of training, and then they'll go to a higher volume training, and then all their content that they're producing, the articles that they're putting out and all that is like, oh my God, I can't believe how fucked up it all was when I was doing this, because now I'm making greater gains.
Right. While
at the same time, somebody's moved from a high volume model, you know, into the HIIT model
and
like,
doing greater gains.
Like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And it's like, you all see what's going on here, right?
Yes.
You know, you're in an indirect way, you're kind of periodizing your training over a quadrennial without really knowing what's kind of going on. So, but those camps, it's not as bad today. I mean, it's nowhere near as bad today. It was like brutal dialogue between that, because if you don't do this, then this is all a waste of time.
Right.
But at the top of all those camps is some monetization, you know, feature, which isn't unique to this industry. You know, it's going to be unique to every industry has something like that, but most people aren't kind of aware of all that. It's like, here's this person that kind of migrated over. And I think that's become a little less combative or debated because there's so many more people out there. There's so many more voices that people have
opinions
started,
and different concepts,
and people have started to see and to realize that if you're looking at the bodybuilders at the top, you know, enhanced, not enhanced, strength athletes the same way, and really look at what they're doing, they're all doing something a little bit different.
Right.
If there was the best way, they would all be doing.
Yes.
Think about it. I mean, if you're on the enhanced side, this is the thing that I can't believe people don't understand. If you're on the enhanced side, you're putting your life at risk. Nobody's going to disagree with that, just from the drugs and everything else that they're doing. You don't think that person, who's willing to take those risks knowingly, those risks, because they've had friends die. And all that.
Yes.
Okay. So it's not like they're ignorant to these risks, that if there was a best program, they wouldn't do it.
Yes.
I mean, some of these guys, they're eating fish and rice every meal.
Yeah. Right. Willing to sacrifice their health.
Yeah. But no, I'm not going to do that program because it's the best program. No, they're going to do whatever's working best for them. And as that, works its way down, into the general population, the concept's still the same. What's going to work for one person may not work for another person.
Yeah. Right.
You got to cycle through things. Periodize.
Yeah. I like to kind of say when people ask, what's the best program? The one you're not doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you said, you switched from HIIT to high volume, or you switch from high volume to HIIT. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
Each one of those changes resulted in better results.
So the question would be, that would help them, would be, what are the metrics that you're going to track to be able to know if you're actually making progress? Yeah.
Well, again, I mean, what is your goal? If it's hypertrophy, right?
Yeah,
this is hypertrophy. What are you going to, I mean, obviously you can measure, bicep size, but do you know if you've gained body fat? Do you know?
Well, the question with and this just hit me when you said if it was hypertrophy, what went through my brain is, how do they know that's actually what they're looking for? Like, because they could actually get leaner and look bigger.
True.
Like, so what is it exactly with the hypertrophy that said person is looking to obtain? Do they want to actually be bigger?
Right. Or look bigger.
Or look better.
Or
look better.
Better, I guess. Say. I mean, do you look bigger? I mean, arguably.
Yeah, because that influences the nutrition.
Yes.
And it may influence the cardio, it may influence a lot of different things. Whereas for most, I don't think they have metrics that they're tracking at all.
No.
Outside
they're
of
looking in the
body
mirror.
weight.
They're looking in the body weight and the mirror is probably it.
Yeah. And the mirror may not be bad if they're taking a picture.
Yes, to compare it to.
To compare it to the next one. But I think that if people put some thought into what metrics they're going to track, that's going to answer everything that we've already spoken about. Right? Because if it's body fat and you're tracking that, it should decrease at a certain rate.
Right. But then you can argue what's the best way to monitor body fat. It's not a scale. Is it skin fold? It's not bioelectrical impedance. You put a bodybuilder on that who's, literally you can see through his, come up as 20% body fat on bio. So, I mean, that's the other issue, how do you then measure? How do you then quantify? What would be the best way for a layperson that has access? In other words, they're not going to go get a DEXA scan. For body fat? Yeah. Well, I mean, there are those DEXA scan trucks that come around. They used to have them with the hydrostatic weighing, the underwater weighing. Now they have DEXA ones as well. So it is accessible. And certain gyms will tell you when the body comp truck is coming. But if you either use DEXA or underwater weighing, or a skin fold can be very accurate as long as it's done by someone who has years of experience, years of experience. But unfortunately, most people use they stand on the scale. Yeah, I know that's the worst. And that tells you nothing other than how fast it traveled. That electricity traveled through the body, and that's going to change on your water content. You know? I always use the skin folds, but I use Perillo's model because it had 12 sites. So I really didn't care about what the total was. Exactly. But you can see individually which. Yes. And the same person is always doing it. That's what I like about the skin fold versus, like, a lot of people before DEXA was a thing. Everybody was like, oh, hydrostatic weighing. I'm like, yeah, but if you do enough sites with a skin fold, you have a better indicator, particularly for like a bodybuilder, of where they're holding the body fat. Because most guys will have nothing under. So what's the point of the tricep one? That's great, but it's going to be nothing. Or you know what I mean? Like certain guys have nothing on their chest, but you go to the back and all of a sudden you've got this. Like,
my subscap was a bitch.
Yes.
I mean, everything else could be in the single digits, and there's that fucker just sitting there at 16, 17. Like, is this ever going to go away?
Yeah, right. Many guys tend to store their fat on their back. And so hydrostatic weighing won't really indicate where you're storing your fat. It just gives you an overall. You get into DEXA now we can literally see not just around the biceps, we can see here, we can see here, this part of the bicep, higher part of the, we can see everything. So the DEXA is obviously ideal. But if you can, like you said, I would say hydrostatic weighing or skin fold.
Well, there's some other metrics I'd throw out would be strength. Just make sure it's the same movement done the same way.
Certainly,
like a bench press to a 2-board press is not the same.
No, right.
And that can be a quantifiable if you're moving toward a weight, and that can be strength on the repetition ranges. I mean, it's across the board.
Right. It doesn't have to be 1 RM.
And then your cardiovascular endurance. Recovery gets a little difficult to be able to really quantify, but if you're ready to train or not.
Right.
So that kind of plays into there, because one thing I do think is, overtraining is overstated. That a lot of times, it's like, first, this would be a question for you. Like, first off, what is it? I mean, how is that scientifically defined? Like, what is overreaching? What is overtraining? From a science standpoint?
Yeah. So
to me, it's just
right. It's so technically overreaching is when you're overtraining, but you haven't done it long enough to see any of the physiological deficits. That's what overreaching is.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Overtraining it's for most athletes, for most people, your athletes are different than mine, what I call an athlete. An athlete for me is a 40-year-old dad who's an executive for AT&T, whatever. He just wants to look.
Well, I think there's more similarities than you think, because the way that I've defined that from the strength athlete side, not the bodybuilder side, different conversation.
Of course,
is they're strength athletes in the gym, but they're gen pop outside for most. Right. So their eating habits, their lifestyle habits, their work habits are probably no different than the 40-year-old you're speaking to.
Right.
So there's one.
But they want the results.
Yes. That's why I like speaking to so many people that work with those people, because the biggest deficit they have are those things.
Right.
Not the training aspect.
No.
All right. So continue with the overtraining.
Yeah. So most people who go to the gym for an hour, maybe 2 hours a day, you're not going to overtrain. I mean, the human body, our body is designed to survive, to go all day. You know what I mean? Like, we're hunter gatherers. We haven't evolved yet, but somewhat past that capacity. And so I think that overtraining is just overused, the term, you know what I mean? Because like you said, who can overtrain? An Olympic athlete, because they have to get up. Let's say they're a swimmer. They have to do what? They wake up and they do 2 hours of swimming practice. Then they have an hour of weight training. Then they have an hour of speed drills. Then they have an hour of technique. Then they're back in the pool for 2 hours. That person can be overtrained if they don't eat enough, right?
Yeah.
And so for that 40-year-old who goes to the gym and does a 2-hour tough workout 4 or 5 times a week, are you overtrained? Like, probably not overtrained. You might be overreaching, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're just not eating anything. you're not
which in your demographic could be the case.
This is true.
Yeah.
Okay, that may be true, but you'd have to be training again severely. Well, if they're following some of my programs, they're pretty intense. And if they're not eating, then sure, over several weeks, you could become overtrained. But I still think it's so overused, that concept. It's like you did a hard workout, you're feeling your nervous system, right, is shot, your muscles are fatigued. That's not overtrained. That's just trained. That's just a normal, we've all been there, right?
Well, there'll be psychological effects and physical effects, right? So
yes. And
I think they're seeing the psychological effects, which make them think that it's a physical effect.
Right.
Right. To where there is some discipline involved. Yes. Right. Which is going to build that psychological discipline.
I like that word. Yeah, I was going to say psychological strengthening, psychological discipline.
Yeah, and maybe more discipline that's going to kind of play into all that, to where I do think that overtraining gets them. The Barbarian brothers, they used to write some stupid shit, right?
Right.
I think they had some stupid quote like, "There's no such thing as overtraining, just under eating," or something stupid like that, like barbarianisms or whatever they were called. They cracked me up, by the way. But there was a lot of wisdom in some of this dumb shit that they were.
No, I mean, there's no overtraining. There's only under eating. It's kind of true.
Yeah.
Because as long as we all know Michael Phelps' calorie intake, right, was extreme, right? If he didn't reach that calorie intake, he probably would have overtrained. I mean, the amount of training that Michael Phelps had to do in a day required that many calories to support it. And so I think there is some truth to that. There's no overtraining, there's just under eating. That obviously within reason.
Yeah.
But I think most cases, overtraining is under eating.
Yes. And that's to tap back on one of the things that you said with basically it's just volume in the training. You use the Olympic swimmer as an example, is broadly what we're speaking about would be work capacity, right? And I mean, Louis was big on increasing work capacity too. The question I was always would have to him is, at what point is that then where it needs to be? Right? Because you can look at the example that you gave, or you could look at, a high-end CrossFitter. That's a power lifter or a bodybuilder's work capacity compared to that is minuscule.
Right.
Right. So the ability to keep increasing that there's a very high threshold, which is where the whole overtraining conversation is like, wait a minute. Because we can look at these other groups that have built that work capacity to an insane level, to where your 40-year-old, closet bodybuilder, for lack of a better word, is probably not going to have to build the work capacity to that degree.
No.
But they have to build the work capacity to a good degree to be able to elicit the response that they're looking for. Right. And I think that's where we run into the speed bumps, is in the process of them trying to build that, is difficult, psychological, physical, biological, whatever it's going to be. It's going to be difficult to a certain point, but it's easier to maintain once it's there than it is to actually rebuild it.
Yes.
Right. But there has to be some periods of, I don't want to say detraining, but allowing the work capacity to come back down.
Yes. Down.
Otherwise, you're going to be in this linear work capacity pipe, which is going to lead you to train like a CrossFitter, right? And you can't maintain it at all levels because it's going to degrade.
Yeah.
Which was why phasic, periodization kind of gets put in with all that. And I think that's what gets lost there, is maybe some people are starting at a work capacity that's too high for them to start at.
Yeah.
Which is totally possible. Always two sides. But we've all seen people that you just throw into the and 4 weeks later they adapt. Right.
Right. Yeah.
It's just
so I learned to ski.
Yeah. So
there's the hill.
Yeah. Like, you got to kind of balance, what's better. Do we get to that level in 12 weeks at a nice pace?
Right.
Or we just blast it and get in that level in 4? Maybe that's personality type, age, a lot of things can play into that. But I don't know where I fall on that one, to be completely honest.
Same for me.
Yeah.
I'd probably say I kind of brought it up with when we were talking about my younger self and what I would change. And that was, the volume, how much. I think if we could start, or at least we had the understanding that you probably don't need this much right now, I think that would be the better option than doing too much.
I think so. Because if I'm to look through my own training through the years, and cumulative repetitions on a joint, can be a not so good thing.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So especially in the same movement pattern for 40 years with heavy loads and stuff like that. So I can kind of go back and say, no, what if I just axed half of all those repetitions, total volume from the warm-ups, that's all that. Maybe it would have bought me another few years,
maybe
you don't know. I would say it probably would have, because what's going to take people out of any of these sports are going to be injuries, drug addiction, strippers. Yes. I mean, there's other things that kind of come into there, but anybody that's really serious and locked into all that thing, it's usually going to be injuries are going to take them out, or just a big change in their life. Graduate college, go into a workforce, whatever it's going to be. But fitness should never drop out, so it happens more in strength sports than it does in bodybuilding. Like bodybuilders are downsized forever, where strength athletes just kind of fade away to a couch with a bunch of beer.
Yeah, it's either all or none for them, right?
And it's kind of locked into that psychology because for myself, what I battled with a lot is, that's my identity. And I never trained for health ever. Right. So then you got to cross this chasm to where now I have to train for health. And
what's the point if I'm not squatting 500? What's the point?
Yeah.
Right.
Then you're looking at information from people on the health side that you typically wouldn't listen to before. Right. So it's tough. I mean, for a lot, it's really tough, but it's a very small.
That's it. Yeah. That's interesting. You're right. You're right. Less so in bodybuilding because you can't downsize without it being such a big factor. But if you've gone from, squatting 600-700 pounds to now you've got 225 on the bar.
Yeah. And for a lot, it will be when they're done, they're not going to squat anymore because at least for me, I didn't want to be reminded of how weak I'm getting.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm going to avoid anything that's going to show, how bad it really is. So I'm going to create things I've never done before. So I don't know if it's good or not. Just there's ways to kind of manipulate those variables.
Nothing to compare it to.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Which will segue into longevity. So words are important, right? So it's certain words like that we've talked about already that I've kind of asked, to define a little bit more are just so fucking broad. Like what the hell does longevity mean? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like that's a catchphrase for a million different things. So when you're speaking about longevity, how would you define that? So I'll see two different ways to define that. So I'm asking you how to define it, then I'm going to tell you how I define it. But at least somewhere in this, there's athletic longevity, somebody that's actively competing in whatever sport that they're associated with, increasing the time that they can compete. I see that different than longevity of, I just want to try to live the greatest quality of life I possibly can. So those two being separate, so we won't, so speak on both of those. So how would you define the longevity in both those scenarios?
Longevity for an athlete? Yeah, it would be the ability to compete at that level. I think that they're used to competing. And then maybe, like a master's, say, level bodybuilder may, they're not, obviously the masters is no longer competing at the same level they were, but they're still competing. So I don't think it has to be at the level that they're used to competing, but at some level, right?
Yeah.
Being able to compete. And then the longevity is, we're on the same page, is, being able to live at a high quality, being able to take care of yourself, right? Being able to walk, being able to open doors, do your own grocery shopping, those sorts of things. That's kind of what longevity, and without having any real major health issues.
Yeah, I would throw two other defining factors in each one, and that would be in the competitive longevity, still having some kind of thought process on how you're going to live after, right? Because you're still going to have the same body when it's all over. So it doesn't need to be the primary focus, but it should be a secondary focus, which is going to play into when we're talking about longevity of quality of life, is to die acutely would be the best goal. In other words, to not be 3 years bedridden.
Yes.
You know, so you have the muscular foundation, the cardiovascular foundation. So if something really, really bad hits, right, then you're able to absorb a lot of the impacts that's going to have. If it's cancer and you're going to lose.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the number one, what's the word I'm looking for? The number one indicator for survival in cancer patients is muscle mass. Mm-hmm. So you're absolutely right. You know, having that body, maintaining that muscle is going to be critical for how you deal with when you have serious health issues.
Yeah. So it's those would be the big things that play into all that. But somewhere through this conversation ends up being weird ass supplements, you know, only eating at certain, it's again, everything that's on the margins.
Yes.
Instead of everything
keeping
that should be
telomeres
in that
long.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So with that, you know, what would be in the base for living the best quality life that you possibly can? You already said resistance training.
Yeah.
You know, that thankfully is becoming more part of the discussion.
Yeah.
Everywhere, which is good.
Yes. Yes. Very, very good. I mean, Joe Weider said it, I don't know how many decades ago, that there'll be a day where weight training will be considered medicine, you know?
We're almost there.
Yes.
I mean, we really are. For the medical professionals that are embracing it, I would say we are there. But there's still some that aren't embracing, you know, as they should. Of
course.
But as I said earlier, 10, 15 years, you know, they'll no longer be with us.
Right.
You know, then the next generation will fill the shoes that will have that.
Precisely.
You know, so it'll be part of that discussion. Whereas when we would go in to see a doctor when we were younger, it's like, what do you pull a muscle?
Yeah.
Stop training.
Right. Exactly. Is always stop training. So
with the resistance training, because once you're no longer competitive, resistance training isn't going to be enough. Where some people are going to think that's the case.
Right.
You know, so the other pillars being nutrition, you know, mental health and all the other things that fall. Mobility.
Cardiovascular is critical as well. So it's interesting because we're both aging. We're about the same age since we graduated in 86. I'm 56.
Yeah. So I was January 68.
I was January 3rd. My birthday is January 13, 1968. What?
January 6th.
It's January 6th.
So very close.
You're a few days up.
Yeah.
You're older than me.
I'm older. Yeah.
But, it's really interesting because, like you were saying, there's going to come a point where building is going to be impossible. And it's like, I'm at that stage where just maintaining.
How have you navigated that?
Is the goal.
Just personally, like with your own training, how have you had to navigate that since when did you start to really feel a decline?
I'd probably say 50. I think 50 was the magical number for me. Yeah, there's a recent study claiming 44 and 60 are the two ages where we sort of go through the most, like these huge lumps of aging. Yeah. For me, it felt like it was 50.
It was 50 for me.
Like 50 was just like, 48 was okay. Once 50, like, the muscle atrophy, like, like biceps getting shorter.
Yeah.
Like that's the biggest thing is and it doesn't matter your training, it's like I try to let people down easily and gently. It's like, look, I know what I'm preaching is so that you can be healthy as you get older, but there's no amount of lifting, as long as you're a natural athlete, that is going to prevent you from losing muscle as you age. Sarcopenia is a real thing. Weightlifting will decrease the amount of muscle you're losing, but it will not stop it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's just the reality. And so my goals have sort of changed. Now, again, I'm still trying to maintain the muscle. So my hypertrophy goals are still there, but it's not like I'm measuring my biceps every week to see if they grew. It's like the hypertrophy is, can I maintain what I have? So I'm still training hypertrophy wise, but for maintenance. But my, cardiovascular exercises, and I always walk, whether it's outside on a treadmill, do some form of almost every day now. Whereas before, it's like, if I can get my cardio in, and mobility is every day. I try to do, a good 15, 20, 30 minutes of stretching and mobility movement, because as we age, that's the thing that happens is like when you can no longer go look under your bed, you can't get down, you're screwed, and it doesn't have to be that way. Again, your strength training, cardiovascular training is going to be important, but if you keep up that mobility, whether it's stretching, yoga, whatever, I think it's going to have a huge impact on your quality of life.
And moving, I think that's underrated.
Moving is so underrated.
Yes, because it's looking at, friends in my demographic, right? So their work becomes more seated, so there is that, but I kind of have some problems with that. But anyhow, there's that. But they'll get home and then it's just watch TV or whatever it is for 5-6 hours. So their lifestyle without them really knowing becomes more sedentary.
Yes. Without realizing it, like you said.
Yes. Where step tracking becoming popular is great.
Yes.
Right. Because at least, I can say, well, how many steps have you had? It's like, 1,500. I'm like, dude, that sucks.
Yeah.
Like that's really bad.
Yeah. You know right away.
Yeah. And they can double that just by small things.
Very small things. Very small things. Not taking the elevator.
Yes.
Not trying to find the closest parking spot at the grocery store.
Yeah.
Not, small things. I have what I call my 30-60 rule. And it's basically every 30 minutes you're sitting sedentary, get up and just move for 60 seconds. It doesn't have to be exercise. Just be moving. Just go stretch, walk. And it's based on the research that shows when we're sitting for 30 minutes or longer, the genes that control things like fat oxidation and carb utilization drop. Your body, when we're not designed to sit in the daytime. We're designed to either be hunting or gathering or running from predators, right? And so when we're sitting, our body thinks we're sleeping. And so it literally shuts down those genes. It turns them off that do fat oxidation, carb utilization, and starts turning on the genes that store more fat. And so by getting up and doing something like I said, every time you're sitting for 30 minutes, get up and do something, will keep those genes turned on and make a huge impact on your health.
Now, what would be your thoughts on desks, like a standing desk to a seated desk?
So it's an interesting topic. So
to me, you're really not moving.
No, in fact, a standing desk may be worse than a seated desk because when you're standing, you have blood pooling, right? So, like,
calves.
Waitress with the varicose veins, right? So you're not getting the blood to return. And then once you start pooling, right, you have valves in the veins that help push the blood back up. Well, it needs the muscles to contract to help push the blood back up. So if you have a standing desk, it's probably worse than sitting. If you have a standing desk, it needs to be one of those walking desks because you need to be contracting. Just standing there is probably worse than just sitting there.
Interesting. Either way,
yes. Either way, you need to be moving, in my opinion.
What would some of the other low-hanging fruit that you see with a 40 plus demographic that from a longevity standpoint that they're not utilizing?
Well, I mean, like you said, they're commuting, so they're sitting in the car, on the train, or whatever for an hour, 2 hours a day. Then they come home, and now they watch television. My biggest problem is the guys who will go to the gym for an hour, maybe even an hour and a half, and now they think that they've earned the right to sit in front of the television for 3 or 4 hours, and that's not the case. As there was actually a study that showed that those who trained the same during the week, I can't remember exactly what their total hours, but they trained the same, right? About the same amount of time. Those who spent, I can't remember how much time it was watching television, but those who watched more television than those who didn't. And again, it's not about why, it's about being sedentary, right? Those who were more sedentary, even though they trained the same in the gym, had higher waist circumference, higher blood pressure, and higher blood glucose levels, despite training the exact same as this other group. The only difference is they sat more. And so, like, I like to tell people, like, again, I hate to break the news to you, but that hour and a half workout does not, you don't get rewarded by sitting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, in fact, I would say your physical activity outside of the gym is probably more important than what you did in the gym for your overall health and longevity.
That's an interesting one, right? Because I believe I'm on the same page.
Yeah.
With that.
But so many people think that you go in the gym, you train for an hour, right? You've now earned the right to sit the rest of the day
and eat like shit.
Yeah. So in fact, as a bodybuilder, after my leg day, I didn't move the rest of the day. Like, that was the goal, was to not move.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've been there. Yep. Laying in bed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cramping. Yeah. They're good things to think back on.
Right.
It was fun. Right. So,
it was fun, but we didn't really earn the right from a health. I mean, I'm 20 years old. Who the hell cares about my health? I just want to squat 700 pounds. You know what I mean? But for anybody who's interested in longevity, you can't use your workout as your longevity tool. Your workout is basically making you a better athlete. You're saying, oh, I don't play football, I'm not an athlete in life. It's making you can open doors easier, you can carry packages easier, right? And sure, it's giving you health benefits, but even more critical than your workout is just your physical activity throughout the day.
What has there been any science studies that you stumbled across throughout your whole time in this field that really made you pause and think, this is really important, or this is a big pivot, or this is something I have to embrace with myself or clients?
I think it was exactly what we're talking about now, is the fact that when you're sitting for so long, and again, it's just 30 minutes, that it changes the regulation of your genes. And that was the biggest thing I learned in my career as a scientist, was that everything we drink, everything we do in the gym, and it all starts at the level of the gene. Everything we do is turning on or turning off genes. And to sort of speak to the layperson, so I'm not talking about genes that give you blue eyes.
Yeah.
That's your genotype. We're talking about phenotype. These are genes that code for proteins, and proteins are what allows your body to function, put in simple terms. And so these genes are turning on to create proteins, whether it's an enzyme that runs glycolysis so you can burn more carbs, or, an enzyme that runs for fat or produces more hemoglobin so you can carry more oxygen. Everything we do is starting at the level of the gene, but it really didn't hit me about how critical our physical activity is until I started reading that information about how being sedentary by sitting just shuts those genes off, regardless of whether you worked out or not.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one area of research where I was just like, like your workout is not enough. Sadly, you know what I mean? It's about being physically active all day long.
Well, it's interesting because that's a level deeper than just your NEAT dropping.
Right. Yes.
Right. So normally that's where that conversation would be, which kind of just unfolds back into, the metabolism and but doesn't the gene side is a deeper.
Yeah. And there's also research showing that when you sit, blood flow to the brain is even reduced. And so you're not even as cognizant when you're sedentary, when you're sitting.
Interesting, right? That flagged is really interesting to me because
how do we do most of our work? Sitting.
Well, it's also interesting too because nootropics are a huge supplement side right now. That you're in this industry. That might even be. Well, is that more
important because sedentary?
Was it more popular than pre-workouts? Because pre-workouts used to be the number one selling product across the board. I wonder where nootropics sit, as far as what's the best selling supplement.
Best selling wise, I don't have any numbers for you that I've looked at, but I would probably guess that the nootropics, because it speaks to like you don't have to come into the gym and train to take a nootropic, whereas a pre-workout, you're probably not. You could take it at work.
Well, it speaks to a broader audience.
Yes. So I think from that standpoint, that would be a bigger selling category.
Now, with that category, what's bullshit and what's not? Because we can say, caffeine is nootropic. Right?
Yeah, of course.
We all know that, right? And it works.
Yes.
Right? So then you start unpacking all this other stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot on lion's mane now as one of the mushrooms that seems to be very effective. But again, it's a whole new area as well. We think, resistance training is a new area in science. This is, people are finally interested in being smarter and that's saying ignorance is bliss. No, I think when we were saying most people just want to be told what to do, but now I think people are actually interested in their brain functioning better. So this is really a new area, at least in the supplemental world. But there's, a lot of exciting stuff coming out.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask, where do you see that going? Because perhaps it's new because, we see more people with Alzheimer's, dementia, fuck our president, right? So, just watching him speak, you're like, I need to take something for my brain health, So, I don't know, what the motivation behind it is, because there's always a motivation behind it, but then there's also marketing, but marketing follows the motivation.
Yeah, of course. Right?
So there's already research pushing for that with that. So, do you see this as continuing to evolve?
Oh, for sure. There wasn't even a category 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Barely nobody was making, a brain booster. Nowadays it's a very popular category.
Now, what has happened with the joint supplementation? Because your number one YouTube video is on MSM, right?
I think so.
The most popular one that you have. So has that basically just died, right? Because that used to be a hot spot area where
it's actually one of the number one requests I get is for a joint supplement.
And what should people be looking for there?
So
I'm fucked up, right? So it's,
I personally don't have many joint issues. I'm pretty lucky. And it may be because, I'm even though I train heavy, I also train very light. And I think cycling that up very light can, help prevent some of the joint issues. But I would definitely say the MSN has good data behind it. UC2, do you know UC2, which is a chicken cartilage? That's also, there's a lot of good data, about 40 milligrams of UC2, like a Roman numeral 2. And then hyaluronic acid, hyaluronic acid, but it has to be a low.
All right, guys, I'm here at elitefts. I'm at the compound. Nobody is watching right now, so bear with me. I found some bands that I need really, really bad. I'm going to throw them in my bag and take them home with me, so don't tell anybody. Bands are absolutely great. If you're looking for the safest way to train to become fast, to become explosive, become strong, safety. Watch some videos about using bands. Why should you buy the Elite FTS bands? I swear. Promise you guys, these bands will last longer than any other bands you will buy anywhere. They're a little more expensive. They're gonna last a heck of a lot longer. EliteFTS.com. Get your bands just like I am. See ya.
All right, guys, you like the content that we put out through Elite FTS? If it's the podcast, extra content, it's 20 years of being on YouTube, so there's a lot of different content there. We set up a membership YouTube channel, and with the membership YouTube channel, what you'll get is early release on all the podcasts, so you'll get access to it before everybody else. Those will also all be ad-free, so you won't have any interruptions and can listen straight through. And we'll have exclusive content, such as AMAs, to where we'll take all your questions and then answer them for you guys. So take a moment, join the channel. Is that what it is? Join the channel, join the YouTube. Just hit the join button and help support the podcast, and we'll help you.
Low molecular weight, so that it gets into the drink capsule. Those are probably the three.
And by what mechanisms are they going to work?
So certain ones will help to build the cartilage back up, right? And other ones will help reduce pain and inflammation.
Okay. Where the big rock there is to reduce inflammation, which is going to come from fixing the diet to begin with. So,
for real, it is. It's really about fixing that diet before you worry about supplementing, and that's something that I own a supplement company, but the thing I tell people is, supplements don't fix a shitty diet.
No, and I think everybody,
that has to be your foundation, it's called a supplement. It supplements your diet. You need to focus on getting your nutrition in order before you can expect any supplement to provide a benefit,
Yeah, I think people with a longer training age are going to understand that.
Right.
And then they'll have that diet at least dialed in enough to be able to add things in the margins.
Yes.
To be able to work. Now, the other demographic, that won't be the case.
No.
They're just going to take it and
they're
not do
looking for the silver bullet.
And that's why a lot of supplements get a bad name, right? Because they're looking for it to
be. They're marketed to that crowd right there.
Which does a disservice to the crowd that it can actually help, that have their diet. And correct me if I'm wrong, when I say your diet dialed in, it doesn't need to be like 100% dialed in to get impacts from things on the margin, but the majority of it's dialed in.
Right. You're getting enough protein, you're getting enough fat.
Yeah. For myself, I know if my sugar intake is high, it doesn't matter what I'm going to take. My joints are going to hurt like hell.
Right.
It's just how it is. That doesn't mean my sugar intake has to be 0. Right. But there's figuring out that balance with that. With staying on that topic of that joint health, but then taking it out of the nutrition side and putting it into the training side as we get older. So you already mentioned mobility, which is probably the biggest rock in there. From the strength and conditioning standpoint, what should be concerns, or not concerns, but what should be some of the benchmarks people should be working toward?
Older? For older people?
Yeah. Because now we're getting into, say, if it's training to failure, if it's total load, if it's total repetition, there's all these different variables that are going to play in there, where if somebody's bone on bone, in their shoulder or knee or whatever it is, then repetitions may be an issue.
Right.
Yeah, that may be a bigger issue than load.
Right.
right?
Yes.
So what are some other points such as that?
So I mean, for older individuals, I think, dynamic movements are critical, because we're going to be hitting the fast twitch muscle fibers, right? And that's what you lose with sarcopenia. So a lot of the research in like I'm talking like 70, 80-year-olds shows that when they incorporate dynamic training, and obviously everybody knows we're talking about, power training, speed, movement, lighter weight, not going to fail anywhere near failure is so, the value is so overlooked for older individuals, because like I said, with sarcopenia, you're losing the fast twitch muscle fibers. What does dynamic training target? It's targeting those fast twitch muscle fibers. So I think dynamic training, and then even low rep heavy weight training for the same concept of hitting those fast twitch muscle fibers.
So in that middle range is the least important. Say the 8 to 10 reps that they've always.
I think so. Yeah, it really is.
Now with the dynamic training, as long as they're, have the work capacity to do it, where would I'm hesitant to say plyometric work, because I don't want people to think really aggressive bounding, but just slight plyometric work. If you're talking the fast twitch muscle fibers, skipping, stuff like that could fall in that same realm.
For sure.
Is the dynamic.
Yeah. Oh, of course.
Weight training, maybe even better, if they have the mobility, if they have the ability to be, if they got,
yeah, good point. Yes.
So it's where jump rope, things like that can accomplish that same thing. Because what I worry about with the dynamic training is if they're already skilled, they're going to get it. Right.
True.
But if they're starting later,
and
you're trying to teach, compensatory acceleration or force, I don't know if they're really going to get it.
Yeah. And do it properly,
especially if they're older, because they've already lost. That's one of the first good motor abilities that you're going to lose.
Yep.
Will be that. But it's also one that's important to keep in, because it's that kind of goes back to some of the debates I've had with, Louis' dynamic effort training is, well, you can't get more explosive after a certain age. And I'll concede that, fine, but you can lose it. Yeah. So if I'm doing training to maintain it, then now we're talking a different thing.
Right.
Right. So it's kind of plays into that. But if it's already gone,
yes,
then what you're stating is still going to help their longevity.
Sure.
But even at that decreased.
But like you said, it could be an issue if they've already lost a good portion of their fast twitch muscle trying to do them properly.
Yes. But as they age, they'll keep losing more.
True. Yeah. Like hypertrophy, hypertrophy training for me. I'm only losing muscle, but it doesn't mean I'm just going to give up and go, well, I'm losing muscle, so I might as well not work out anymore. I'm still trying to maintain that.
So with that, it's a losing battle, right?
Yes.
But
age is a losing battle for sure.
But it does seem that you can push it back. In other words, we both sat here and said at 50s when we got kicked in the nuts. Other people are getting kicked in the nuts at 40, but they don't have the training history with that.
Right.
So now if we're talking that dynamic component, is that also going to be a losing battle? Or if it's compromised and they're just trying to maintain, is that easier to maintain throughout one's silver years or whatever we want to call than the hypertrophy? Because one would be more neural, right?
Yeah. Yes. So, right. Good. That's a great point. I think you would probably lose less, but we don't just go through sarcopenia as we age. We also lose reaction time. Oh, yeah. Right? We 39, I think 39 I saw a study that 39 was the age about where you lose your reaction time, takes a hit, which happens to be the age that Chuck Liddell had, 3 knockouts in one year with 39. So I think that tracks properly. So there are neural deficits as well with aging. But that's a good question, whether you would lose less power as you age or muscle, because with sarcopenia, you're losing the muscle mass.
Yeah, for the researchers, there you go.
But there are neurological deficits with aging as well.
Yeah.
That we know, I think, less about than with sarcopenia, because it's easier to see if a muscle has atrophied or not versus whether or not that motor unit is working,
Yeah. Flexibility would be one that I think that could be maintained, all the way through, as long as it's being trained.
I think so.
So I'm just kind of going through the different attributes in my head.
Right.
Where would you think that as we're aging in those other years that cardiovascular fitness is king? Because that's what old school thought would be, but strength training is kind of getting in there as well. But heart function is heart function.
Yeah, heart function is heart function. Obviously critical. Obviously, the longer you're alive, the more that's going to take a hit, right? You've probably got some calcium deposits. You've got some narrowing arteries.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? The longer you've been alive, it's impossible to avoid, completely avoid that. So, it's all important. Obviously, if your ticker's not working, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how much muscle mass you have.
Well, they're interesting conversations.
I'd like to kind of think they're all important, obviously, you know what I mean? As a component of the whole body, obviously, cardiovascular, flexibility, strength training.
There's definitely a balance, but if we're to take what we see in the hypertrophy world, and how it's fractured of all these different camps. Well, when we're speaking about these motor abilities, you're going to have the flexibility camp, you're going to have the mobility camp, you're going to have the cardio camp, you're going to have the strength training camp, right? So the same thing still kind of, and each one of those are going to say that this is the most important,
right?
While they're in there, right? To where it would be interesting to actually know which one actually is.
Yeah.
Right? Because a case can be made, you need all of them. So
of course,
state that you need all of them.
For sure.
Right? Because
they're all arguably as important as the other one.
Yeah, because a case can be made for all.
Yeah.
Right. It's the person, if they fall and break their hip, did they actually break their hip when they fell, or did they break their hip because they didn't have the stability to be able to maintain the muscular position to fall? It's one of those.
Or was it because their bone density wasn't enough because they weren't doing enough resistance training?
Yeah. So you see what I'm saying? Each camp can take, this is what's so interesting to me. Each camp can take every example like that and own it.
Yes.
With whatever they want, which creates the confusion, downstream to where the answer is obvious. It's all of it, right? And trying to put it all in there.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to watch how on every one of those, maybe outside of cancer, right? Nobody can really take ownership of having to fix that outside of probably being heavier going into it's going to help.
Right.
Because you're going to waste. If you go in there, too lean, too light, you're probably fucked.
Yep.
Sure. But on the flip side of that is for heart work, heart issues, that's probably the better.
Yes.
So which one are you going to try to battle?
I would probably say then, you're right. That cardiovascular would be king, because if your heart's not working, it doesn't matter how much muscle mass you have or not to open that door. You're not opening that door.
Well, I guess, one thing that we did leave out would be obesity.
Sure.
Right? Because that probably is.
That's just going to mess up everything.
That screws everything up.
Inflammation, you know what I mean? And then, and inflammation is going to have impact on the heart and brain function. And
I don't know where I really sit on, say, Ozempic or that whole category of drugs. I don't know where I sit on that. I'm not educated enough to really know. But what I can say is it changed some narrative, right? Where pre that, if it was the body positivity movement or whatever it was, and I don't think anybody should be treated like shit. So everybody agrees on that.
Right.
But there's a health factor, right? So when all those conversations are going on with that, I wanted to scream and shout and say, how many 70-year-olds are 150 pounds overweight? Zero.
Right. Or they wouldn't make it there. They wouldn't make it.
They wouldn't make it. or they were, and then they got hit with some major illness that ripped their body weight down, cancer, leukemia, some heart issues or whatever it was. And so there's a health side here, yes. Right? And right. I don't know why when that debate was going on, that wasn't being put out there, because the health side was definitely being put out, like longevity, whatever it's going to be. But nobody just came out and said, how many people are 70 years old that weigh 385 pounds?
Right.
Maybe there's an outlier somewhere.
Sure,
but
there definitely is,
but no, it's not the case. The people that were really, really big, if they make it to 80, they're not big when they're 80.
No.
So something happened, to be able to age,
yes.
Pulling the tissue off, whatever it's going to be able to do that. Where with those categories of drugs, like I said, I don't know where I sit. I do know that some bodybuilders do use it for their peaking, to kind of offset the hunger, where I think that's just whatever, and but what I couldn't understand until it dawned on me the other day is why insurance companies were embracing it, because it's expensive, right? I mean, at least it was. So they're going to absorb that cost if they're going to cover that, right?
Yep.
But if it's taking somebody, if it's taking 30% of their weight off, then they're going to save on all the other expenses later down the line, right? So where, I don't think they're in bed with, pharma on that one.
No.
They're just looking at covering their own ass, because they're going to look at how long somebody can live and what they're going to cost in medical expenses.
Yes.
But for a while, it was like, this is weird. Like, they covered this really quick. Like, normally I wouldn't see that. So that's why I'm kind of conflicted, because if it is, doing that, and then people are able to get in that healthy range, from that.
Yes.
And then we don't know long-term impacts or whatever it's going to be.
I think it's, for me, it's an individual, like if it's somebody who's morbidly obese, but if it's,
well, we're going to see it on the other
some socialite housewife who just wants to drop 20 pounds.
Yeah.
It's,
well, that's where we're going to see it.
You can do it. There's much, I won't say easier ways, but better ways.
Yes.
To do it, you know what I mean? So if it's somebody morbidly obese, sure, that's a definite benefit for them. Same with like gastric bypass, sure, great fix for somebody morbidly obese. Luckily, they won't do it on somebody who just wants to drop 10 to 20 pounds. Yeah. But if they could, there'd be more of those surgeries for sure.
Yeah. And were there any topics that you wanted to discuss I didn't bring up?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I think, there's nothing specifically that I wanted to. I like when it just sort of.
Oh, I got one more to be able to throw out at you. All right, because you're in a fierce space in this industry. So as an entrepreneur in this industry, both on the supplement side and on the educational side, what advice would you give younger entrepreneurs that are coming up in this space? Because I mean, the supplement space is brutal, but I can say right now, probably the whole space is brutal.
Yeah.
So just low hanging advice.
Well, the advice that I like, obviously I'm about education. So the advice I always give, it's kind of the same advice I give to my kids, is you never can have too much education, right? No, if you want to be an expert in an area, and again, we've talked about the bodybuilders who've sort of learned themselves versus the academics, right? Is that, whatever the area you want, if you're into fitness or nutrition, your best bet is to try to get a degree, especially today, because there's, when you and I started doing this, there were only a handful of people who were talking about fitness on YouTube or on Facebook or, online, a handful of us, literally. Yeah. I literally can count them, maybe two hands, you know what I mean? And now there are millions of, fitness influencers. So to be able to stand out and have people take you seriously, it would be helpful to have, a feather in your cap, like a degree. I mean, it doesn't have to be PhD, but at least if somebody has a degree in that area, in exercise science or nutrition, whatever it is you want to be a expert in and give advice on. And then the other advice is to actually apply it. You have to, I'll see scientists out there saying things like, before we really knew a lot of the protein intake, that 30 grams of protein is the maximum amount of protein that you need to get. 30 grams. Do you remember this study?
Sure. Was this for a day or a meal? Because I remember the one for the meal. For a meal. Yeah, I remember that.
Okay.
You can't absorb past that.
30 grams is the max you need for a meal. Okay. So I'll see a scientist stating that the most protein you need is 30 grams. You also need to get a minimum of 3 grams of leucine to maximize. And I'm like, there's no protein source that gives you 3 grams of leucine and 30 grams of protein. Because that scientist doesn't ever apply, they don't apply their advice.
Yeah.
If they actually worked with people, they would eventually realize, wait a minute, you're not getting 3 grams of leucine from that 30 grams of protein, but they don't actually apply it. So you also have to, apply that advice. Obviously my science background is important in the knowledge, but if I wasn't lifting and competed in bodybuilding, I wouldn't be able to give the same advice that I give regardless of my science degree. So you need to sort of have both ends. I think and again, ideally, right? Ideally, you would want to have some, education with a decent amount of experience in that area in application to really stand out.
I agree. The other thing I would put with that is they're going to find, as we've all found, you're going to be biased in one side or the other. With that, and to understand what that is,
a good point,
and then to embrace that,
with this,
right?
Yes.
And then if that's where your bias is, create a network of people on, the other side of that, or in the other disciplines to be able to go to when your bias gets stuck.
That's a great point. Because
they all do, right? And one way that you can do that is to avoid speaking in absolutes, because that's gonna alienate your ability to build the network that you're really going to need, right? Because by doing that, you're going to piss off people.
For sure.
You're going to piss off the people that actually
going to reduce your network.
And then your network gets reduced to a bunch of idiots, or ignorance, as you have in those areas, so that, and with social media, the ability to network now is greater than it's ever been, right? Which is odd. Right, because also the narrative of absolutes is also higher than it's ever been. Which creates a great opportunity, though, if we really critically think this through, of somebody that does want to get in this for a long term, as their career. What a great opportunity, because all those other people are going to cannibalize.
Right. Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it's a longer path, which nobody disagrees with. I mean, we've all been in this for 40 some years. So it's not the path people think. And going back to the 2 handfuls of people, very few of them are still around. Now, to some of their credit, some of them just cashed out and did very, very well, which, there's that. But a lot of them just burned out, because bullshit doesn't sell.
Yeah.
Not long term. Bullshit sells short term, but you can't build a career on bullshit.
No.
So the networking is big.
And I'd add, keep an open mind.
Yes.
Stuff is going to change, and you can't spend your life trying to defend something that used to be true when there's evidence that it's not. Look, when I first started in this, we all said things like, you don't want to have casein protein around workouts because it's too slow digesting. You want to only have whey. Mm-hmm. And now we know that protein source and the speed is not as critical. But, I didn't maintain that, oh, you only need whey, only because we said it before. So be flexible, have an open mind and be flexible, because, the evidence over time is going to change.
Mm-hmm. What would be the best way for people to follow you, find you, contact you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, go to any of your preferred social media platforms, whether it's YouTube, Facebook. Is anybody still on Facebook? I still have a Facebook.
Yeah.
TikTok, Instagram.
Oh, you're on TikTok.
Oh, I'm on TikTok. Yeah, of course. Got to be in TikTok. It's the next wave.
Yeah, I know. I think I have a profile, but I don't think I haven't posted to it.
See, you asked me a question. Is there anything that I think I'm slow on? Like, I'm pretty, once I see that there's a trend, I pretty much jump on it.
Yeah. Well, that's been a tricky thing to navigate too, because
there's so many.
There's so many, I can't remember how long it was, but 5 years ago or whatever, I'm like, I'm going to get on all of them. If anything, it's just going to secure my handle,
right?
Whatever it is. And then I'm like, oh my God, there's like Minds and Rumble. There's like, oh,
it's
fuck. Like
so many.
Then it's like, which ones matter?
Then there's LinkedIn.
Yes. And it's which ones matter, becomes that filtration process, to where my advice with people there is, probably the same, like secure your handle and your name on all of them.
Yeah, right.
Just so somebody else can't go be an idiot on it. And then find the one that you can determine has some value, for your business, A, or B, just for you personally.
Yeah, right.
To be able to learn from, and then double down on those, but it can't just be one. I've seen too many people in the last, since the 2020 lose their account, wow. And that sucks, when they have 1 million followers or 200,000 followers or even 5,000 followers. And that's
that happened to me on TikTok.
Yeah.
I had, early on when I first started, 250,000 followers, and they banned me for, get this, explicit sexual content. Yeah.
Because you weren't wearing a shirt?
I don't know. They won't. And that's the other thing. You can't get it. I tried to get feedback on what it was. They wouldn't even tell me what video it was. I could only guess. And so I have no idea. We debated it. Mm-hmm. I even had some, people who were connected go in and you just can't get through to anybody there.
No, it's a pain in the ass. I mean, I'm still dealing with it.
I lost my account on TikTok originally.
Our company Facebook got hacked a few years ago and still haven't been able to resolve that whole thing. And the Twitter, when that first started, I was one of the first to actually be on Twitter. They used to have these, I think it was called a Shorty Award, where I was going to win the Shorty Award the 1 year, and then Lance Armstrong logged in and just fucking killed everybody. But with that one though, because I never really cared that much, outside of the initial, when it was first launched, I ended up losing that one, but it wasn't a ban. It was because I guess it started out as just like SMS, and then it moved over to being, I remember. And I never transferred. And so it just got waxed out because I never transferred it.
Well, you were really early.
And it was when it first started.
I was going to say that's,
I'm like, well, this is kind of stupid, but whatever.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So that one got waxed. And it's when that one happened, there's like 5 of us that kind of all felt we're like, what the hell? Like, what we get banned for? And this is before the time anybody's being banned. It's like, this is what it is. I'm like, well, this sucks. But anyhow, it's interesting how they all change too.
Yes.
Over a period of time. Yes. And, we see with Facebook, who knows, it may reignite, it may not, who knows. But for a time it was, bodybuilding.com probably saw this as well. We had, on our site, we had coaching logs at the time where, it was basically just the coaches writing blogs. Yep. And then when Facebook came, it kind of killed the whole coaching logs, because now they can just put it on their Facebook page, and then there's interaction with that. Where when we had the training logs, Instagram kind of cannibalized that because it's easier to post the video and write what you did on that training day there. So as a company, you got to navigate, those changes as well. Yeah. But you're paying attention what's going on, and then throughout that. So that would be the other advice for the entrepreneur as well, is this may be what's working right now, but you got to keep an eye on what else is going on, because quicker than you think, it will become like
something
Facebook.
different. Yeah.
like Facebook used to be for us was the thing.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Now
it was the place to be.
Yeah. And now it's just like an afterthought, like maybe I should share my video there.
Yeah. None of my kids, and I have kids from almost 30 down to 11, 4, none of them have a Facebook account.
Interesting. So it's TikTok and Instagram.
Oh, for sure. TikTok and Instagram.
Interesting.
No Facebook, no X, formerly known as Twitter.
All right. Well, let's wrap this up. I want to thank you for coming out. All your links are in the description, and we're done.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching the video to the end. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and click here, 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 or here for more videos.